Welcome, friend, to another journey together. Tonight, we embark on an exploration of profound hidden wisdom, meticulously preserved through ages to soothe the agitated mind and usher in a state of profound, restorative tranquility. Feel free to share what time it is and where you are listening from. Going to share a curated collection of ancient parables and timeless Buddhist tales designed to unlock the deepest chambers of mental serenity and emotional liberation. Each narrative holds a potent, transformative teaching capable of recalibrating your entire inner landscape, dissolving the clutches of anxiety, incessant worry, and the endless pursuit of external validation. These are not mere stories for slumber, they are deeply embedded insights passed down by those who understood a fundamental truth many have forgotten, that true contentment arises not from altering our surroundings, but from transforming our perception of them. As the Persian poet Rumi once observed, the quieter you become, the more you can hear. Over the course of our journey, you'll uncover precisely how these age-old truths can reshape your experience of life. As we journey through these remarkable tales, you'll notice a powerful shift begin to unfold. The tight grip of everyday concerns will naturally soften. The constant hum of your thoughts will gradually diminish. You'll find yourself effortlessly drifting into a realm of deep comprehension and abiding peace. So, settle in profoundly now. Let your body surrender to whatever supports you. Take one deliberate breath with me, and as you exhale, know that you are about to receive insights that have been waiting for your awakening since time immemorial. Our first tale reveals the profound mystery of identity itself. This is the monk who forgot his name. Master Dogen was walking along a mountain path when he encountered a weathered monk sitting beneath an ancient pine tree. The stranger's robes were patched and faded from years of travel, and his eyes held the peaceful depth that comes only from long practice. Curious about this wandering practitioner, Dogen approached and offered the traditional greeting. "Good morning, brother. I am Dogen of Ai Temple. May I ask your name?" The monk looked up with a gentle smile, paused for a long moment, and replied, "Master, I have forgotten it completely." Dogen was intrigued. "How can you forget something so fundamental? Your name has been with you since birth." The wandering monk chuckled softly. "Master, I have been traveling for 30 years, sitting in meditation, serving others, walking these mountain paths. I have been so busy being myself that I never had time to remember what to call it. When I wake each morning, I am simply awareness, awakening. When I help a traveler, I am simply compassion in action. When I sit in meditation, I am simply presence being present. What need is there for a label?" Dogen felt something shift inside him, as if a door he didn't know existed had suddenly opened. "But surely you must have some way of referring to yourself. The birds call me by my footsteps on the path. The villagers know me by the kindness I offer. The mountains recognize me by my gratitude for their beauty. Each moment provides all the identity I need." The monk gestured to the pine tree above them. "Does this tree suffer from not knowing its name? Does the stream worry about what to call itself as it flows toward the sea?" Understanding dawned on Dogen's face like sunrise breaking over the peaks. He bowed deeply and said, "You have achieved what most of us spend lifetimes pursuing. You have discovered who you are by forgetting who you think you should be." The nameless monk bowed in return. "And you, Master Dogen, have recognized this truth. Perhaps we are both closer to our original nature than we imagined. The Buddha once said, You are not your name, your body, or your thoughts. You are the awareness in which all these arise. What emerges from this story is a profound teaching about the difference between our essential nature and the conceptual identities we carry. Why do we cling so tightly to names, roles, and self-define? Zen Buddhism explains that the ego mind constantly seeks to solidify itself through labels and categories. We become attached to being a teacher, a parent, a successful person, a spiritual seeker. These identities provide a sense of security and continuity, but they also create a prison of limitations. Now, consider how much mental energy you spend maintaining your various identities. The professional persona you present at work, the family role you play at home, the social image you project with friends. Each requires constant reinforcement and protection. You might notice anxiety arising when these identities are threatened or challenged. This is the ego's fear of dissolution, its terror of discovering what lies beneath the accumulated layers of self-concept. The nameless monk represents what Zen calls original face, the authentic self that exists before the mind, creates stories about who we are. This is not a blank emptiness, but rather a dynamic, responsive awareness that naturally expresses compassion, wisdom, and spontaneous, appropriate action, without needing to reference a fixed identity. Zen teacher Hangpo taught, your everyday mind is the way. When you try to turn toward it, you move away from it. The more we grasp after spiritual identities or try to become someone special, the further we drift from our natural state. The monk's forgetting represents a letting go so complete that even the one who might remember has dissolved. In Japanese aesthetics, there's a concept called mushin, meaning no mind or no heart. This doesn't indicate absence, but rather a state of such complete presence that the mediating self-consciousness disappears. Like a master calligrapher whose years of practice allow the brush to move. Without interference from the thinking mind, the nameless monk moves through life without the friction of self-reference. Modern neuroscience confirms what Zen has long taught. The sense of a solid, continuous self is actually a construction of the brain, a useful fiction that helps us navigate complex social environments. But this fiction becomes problematic when we mistake it for ultimate reality. We suffer when we try to defend or enhance something that exists only as a collection of thoughts and memories. The Buddha said, in the end, just three things matter: how well we have lived, how well we have loved, how well we have learned to let go. Notice that none of these require a fixed identity. Living fully, loving deeply, and letting go completely are all expressions of our essential nature, rather than achievement of a particular someone. Tonight, as you rest in the quiet darkness, can you sense the awareness that observes your thoughts without being defined by them? Can you feel the life force moving through your body without needing to claim ownership of it? What would it be like to experience yourself as pure presence, temporarily borrowed by consciousness for the sake of this precious human experience? As the Buddha taught, when you realize there is nothing lacking, the whole world belongs to you. In forgetting our names, we remember our true nature. In releasing our grip on identity, we discover the freedom that was always already here. Let us now turn to a tale that reveals the impermanent nature of all precious things. This is the tea master's empty cup. Master Yamamoto was renowned throughout the region for his exquisite tea ceremonies. His every movement embodied decades of practice, and his collection of tea implements was legendary. Among his most treasured possessions was an ancient porcelain cup delicate as an eggshell, and painted with cherry blossoms that seemed to dance in the light. This cup had been passed down through 15 generations of tea masters, each one adding to its story and reverence. One autumn morning, Yamamoto traveled to visit Zen Master Bank, carrying his precious cup, carefully wrapped in silk. He had heard of Bankai's wisdom and hoped to share tea with him, perhaps even receiving some profound teaching about the way of tea. Bank welcomed him warmly into his simple hut. "Please let us share tea together," Yamamoto said, unwrapping his treasured cup with ceremonial care. "This cup has served tea masters for 400 years. Each sip connects us to the lineage of those who came before." As he spoke, Yamamoto lifted the cup to show its delicate beauty. But in that moment, whether from nervousness or simply the way of all things, the cup slipped from his fingers. Time seemed to slow as it fell through the air, then shattered against the stone floor. With a sound like a small bell breaking, Yamamoto gasped and immediately dropped to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "Master Bank, I am so sorry. This cup survived wars, earthquakes, and centuries of careful handling, only to be destroyed in my carelessness. 400 years of history lost in a single moment." Bankai calmly bent down and picked up one of the larger shards, examining it with gentle curiosity. He turned it slowly in his weathered hands, feeling its texture and weight. "Tell me, my friend," he said quietly, "what is the age of this piece of clay?" Yamamoto looked up through his tears, confused by the question. "Master, this clay," Bankai continued, "before it was shaped into a cup, before it was fired in a kiln, before it was painted with cherry blossoms. How old was it then?" Yamamoto stared at the fragment in Bang's palm. Slowly understanding began to dawn. The clay existed long before any potter touched it. It came from the earth itself. "And how old is the earth?" Bank asked gently. "Countless eons. And when this cup returns to dust, as all things must, how old will that dust be?" Yamamoto's tears stopped flowing. A strange lightness began to fill his chest. "Master, clay has no age. It simply returns to clay. The elements that form this cup will become countless other things. Mountains, rivers, flowers, other cups." Bankai smiled and set the shard gently on the ground. "Now you understand the true nature of inheritance. What we pass down is not the temporary form, but our appreciation for the eternal transformation. Your 400 years of tea ceremony continue in you, not in any object." Yamamoto began to laugh, first softly, then with growing joy. "I was so attached to preserving the past that I forgot to be present. For this moment, the cup served its final purpose perfectly, teaching me about impermanence." "Indeed," said Bankai. "And now, shall we have tea? I believe I have some simple pottery that would be honored to serve." Buddha's wisdom reminds us, all conditioned things are impermanent. When you see this, you are above sorrow. The heart of this lesson lies in our relationship with attachment and the profound peace that comes from accepting the transient nature of all phenomena. Why do we suffer so intensely when precious things break, relationships end, or circumstances change? Zen, Buddhism, points to our fundamental misunderstanding of the nature of security. We unconsciously believe that permanence exists, that some things can be preserved forever, and that our happiness depends on maintaining certain conditions unchanged. This illusion creates what Buddhism calls dukkha, the suffering that arises from trying to grasp the ungraspable. We form attachments not just to objects, but to people, experiences, accomplishments, and even spiritual states, imagining they can provide lasting satisfaction. When these inevitably change or disappear, we experience the shock of broken expectations. Consider your own experiences of loss. Perhaps a childhood home that was sold, a relationship that ended, a job that disappeared, or even small daily disappointments like a favorite restaurant closing. Notice how much of the pain comes not from the loss itself, but from the story you tell about what that loss means. Dietz Master's initial anguish came from his belief that something irreplaceable had been destroyed. Yet, Banks' teaching reveals a deeper truth. Nothing is ever truly lost, because nothing was ever truly separate to begin with. The elements that compose the cup existed before its creation and continue existing after its destruction. This is not merely philosophical consolation, but a recognition of the fundamental interconnectedness that Zen calls interdependence. Vietnamese Zen, Master Thich Nhat Hanh, teaches about interbeing, the reality that all phenomena exist only in relationship, constantly arising and passing away within an endless web of causes and conditions. The cup was never just a cup, but a temporary gathering of earth, fire, water, wind, and human creativity. When it shattered, nothing was lost. The elements simply return to new possibilities. This understanding transforms our relationship with impermanence from fear to wonder. Instead of desperately trying to preserve things as they are, we can appreciate their constant becoming. The broken cup becomes teacher. The lost job becomes opportunity. The ended relationship becomes space for growth. Zen practice cultivates what the Japanese call mononora, a poignant awareness of the impermanence of all things. This isn't sadness, but rather a bittersweet appreciation that enhances rather than diminishes our love for what is temporary. Knowing that the cherry blossoms will fall makes their blooming more precious, not less. The Buddha said, "Attachment is the root of suffering." But this doesn't mean we should become cold or indifferent. True non-attachment is actually deeper love, appreciation that doesn't try to possess, gratitude that doesn't demand permanence, care that can let go when the time comes. Tonight, as you notice your tendency to grasp tightly to people, possessions, or plans, can you remember the clay returning to clay? Can you love fully while holding lightly, knowing that everything you cherish is on loan from the universe? What would it feel like to appreciate this moment's gifts without needing them to last forever? As the Buddha taught, everything is changeable, everything appears and disappears. There is no blissful peace until one passes beyond the agony of life and death. In accepting impermanence, we discover the peace that doesn't depend on anything remaining the same. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, we encounter a story about the paradox of effort and surrender. This is the student who couldn't sit still. Young monk Jishin had been at the monastery for 3 months, and his inability to sit in meditation had become legendary among the other students. During the morning zazen period, while his fellow monks sat like mountains, still silent and serene, Jashin was in constant motion. He would fidget with his robes, scratch his nose, shift his weight from side to side, and crane his neck as if looking for something he'd lost. His breathing was audible, marked by sighs of frustration. Inevitably, he would give up, stand quietly, and pace at the back of the meditation hall. The other students whispered about him during work periods. Some felt sorry for him. Others were annoyed by the distraction. And a few smugly assumed he simply lacked the proper commitment to practice. But Master Ryoan, the temple's abbot, watched Jishin's struggles with patient interest, saying nothing for months. One crisp morning after another, failed attempt at sitting, Jishin approached his teacher with tears of frustration in his eyes. "Master, I am clearly not suited for this practice. Perhaps I should return to my family's farm. I cannot seem to find even a moment of stillness." Ryoan looked at the young monk with kind eyes. "Jishin, I have a different task for you. Our monastery garden has been neglected. The weeds are overtaking the vegetables and the paths need tending. Would you be willing to care for it?" Grateful for any way to contribute despite his meditation failures, Jishin bowed and accepted immediately. "Yes, Master, I would be honored." The next morning, instead of sitting in the meditation hall, Jishin made his way to the overgrown garden. He knelt among the plants and began to pull weeds, feeling the earth soft and cool beneath his fingers. As he worked, he noticed which plants needed water and which were receiving too much shade. When rain fell, he took shelter under the tool shed and listened to the rhythm of drops on the roof. When the sun was strong, he worked in harmony with its heat, taking breaks in natural rhythm with his body's needs. Weeks passed. Jishin found himself rising before dawn, eager to greet the garden in the quiet morning light. He learned to read the subtle signs of plant health, the way leaves curled when thirsty, how certain vegetables preferred morning attention, while others thrived with evening care. His movements became economical and graceful as he worked, with rather than against the natural cycles of growth and decay. One day, while harvesting tomatoes, Jishin realized he had been kneeling motionless for over an hour, completely absorbed in carefully selecting the perfectly ripe fruit. His mind had been quiet, focused, present. When he stood up, his body felt loose and natural, free from the tension that had always plagued his sitting practice. That evening, drawn by something he couldn't name, Jishin quietly entered the meditation hall and took his seat among the other monks. To his amazement, his body settled immediately into stillness. His breath became deep and natural. His mind, accustomed now to the focused attention that gardening required, rested easily in the present moment. For the first time since arriving at the monastery, he sat through the entire period without moving. After the sitting, another student approached Master Ryoan with curiosity. Respected teacher, how did gardening teach Jishin to meditate? I don't understand the connection. Ryoan smiled and touched the soil still visible under his own fingernails. I never taught him to meditate. I taught him to stop fighting with himself. In the garden, he learned to work with conditions as they are, rather than demanding they be different. He discovered the natural rhythm of effort and rest, attention and ease. These are the same qualities that make sitting practice possible. The student pressed further. But Master, why couldn't he learn this directly through zazen instruction? Because, Ryoan replied, Jishin's particular mind needed to understand surrender through action before it could surrender through stillness. The garden taught him that true effort flows with natural conditions rather than forcing against them. Some students learn peace through sitting still. Others must learn stillness through peaceful action. As the Buddha observed, just as the great ocean has one taste, the taste of salt, so also this teaching has one taste, the taste of liberation. This tale unveils the truth that authentic spiritual practice cannot be forced through willpower alone, but must emerge from a deeper understanding of how to work harmoniously with our own nature. Why do we struggle so often when we try to impose spiritual discipline on ourselves? Zen Buddhism reveals that much of our suffering in practice comes from what it calls gaining mind. The ego's attempt to achieve enlightenment through force and acquisition. We approach meditation like a military campaign, trying to conquer our thoughts and subdue our restless energy through sheer determination. This approach inevitably creates internal warfare. Part of us wants to be still and peaceful, while another part resists control and rebels against imposed discipline. The more forcefully we try to suppress our natural energy, the more turbulent it becomes. We end up fighting ourselves, creating exactly the kind of internal tension that makes meditation impossible. Look deeply at your own relationship with spiritual practice. Do you notice the subtle violence of demanding that your mind behave differently than it does? The frustration when your meditation doesn't match your expectations, the self-judgment when you feel distracted or agitated. Each of these represents a form of fighting with yourself, rather than learning to work skillfully with your actual conditions. Jashin's transformation came through what Zen calls right effort, not the strain of forced concentration, but the natural focus that arises when we align with, rather than resist our circumstances. In the garden, he discovered how to be fully present through purposeful activity. His attention was naturally drawn to the immediate needs of the plants, the texture of soil, the rhythm of seasons. This wasn't forced mindfulness, but organic engagement with life as it presented itself. Zen master Suzuki Roshi taught, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This paradox captures the essence of Jishin's journey. He didn't need to become someone different to practice successfully. He needed to discover how his particular temperament could express itself authentically within the structure of practice. The garden became Jishin's meditation hall because it provided what his restless energy required: purposeful movement, tangible results, and connection with natural cycles. Rather than trying to eliminate his kinetic nature, Master Rian helped him channel it toward awakening. The same energy that made sitting meditation difficult became the very quality that made him an exceptional gardener and eventually a skilled meditator. This points to a crucial understanding. In Zen practice, there are as many ways to cultivate presence as there are human temperaments. Some people naturally incline towards seated meditation, others toward walking practice, chanting, service work, or mindful labor. The key is not finding the right practice, but discovering how your unique constitution can most authentically express the universal principles of awareness, compassion, and wisdom. Vietnamese Zen teacher Thich Nhat Hanh speaks of engaged Buddhism, the recognition that washing dishes, caring for children, or tending gardens can be as profound as any formal meditation when approached with full presence. Jishin's story illustrates this perfectly. His breakthrough came not through perfecting a particular technique, but through learning the fundamental attitude that makes all practice effective: willing cooperation with what is. The Buddha said, "Hatred is never appeased by hatred in this world. By non-hatred alone is hatred appeased. This is a law eternal." This applies not just to external conflicts, but to our internal relationship with our own minds. Fighting our restless thoughts with mental force only creates more agitation. Learning to work patiently and skillfully with our minds as they actually are. This is the path to genuine transformation. Consider areas in your own life where you might be fighting yourself unnecessarily. Perhaps you struggle with a particular emotion, so repeatedly trying to suppress anger or eliminate anxiety through willpower. Or maybe you have creative impulses that you judge as distractions from more serious pursuits. What would it look like to find skillful ways to channel these energies rather than simply trying to eliminate them? Zen practice ultimately teaches us that enlightenment is not about becoming someone different, but about fully becoming who we already are beneath our conditioning and resistance. Jishin's restless energy was never the problem. His inability to find an appropriate expression for it was what created suffering. Tonight, as you notice areas where you're fighting with your own nature, can you sense possibilities for channeling that energy more skillfully? Perhaps your analytical mind, instead of being a meditation obstacle, could find expression through studying Dharma texts. Maybe your emotional sensitivity, rather than being a vulnerability, could become a pathway to deeper compassion. What aspects of yourself are you trying to eliminate that might instead need better expression? As the Buddha taught, you yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. True spiritual practice begins with this radical self-acceptance, not approval of all our behaviors, but willingness to work compassionately with our actual starting point, rather than fighting to become someone else. Now let us explore a Zen story about the unexpected pathways to wisdom. This is the master who sold enlightenment. In the bustling marketplace of ancient Kyoto, among the vendors selling rice, silk, and pottery, an unusual sight appeared one morning. A well-dressed man had set up a small stall with an elaborate banner that read, "Enlightenment for sale, 1 gold coin only. Achieve instant liberation." A crowd gathered, some laughing at the audacity, others curious about what enlightenment might look like when packaged for purchase. The man behind the stall was clearly a charlatan. His robes were expensive, but worn incorrectly. His manner was theatrical rather than serene, and his eyes held the shifty quality of someone accustomed to quick escapes. He called out to passers-by, "Why spend years in meditation? Why suffer through difficult practice for just 1 gold coin? You can have what the monks struggle lifetimes to achieve." Most people walked by, shaking their heads or muttering about the shamelessness of such a display. But as morning stretched toward midday, a familiar figure approached the stall. Master Ikkyu, renowned throughout the region for his wisdom and unconventional teaching methods, stopped before the banner and studied it with apparent seriousness. 1 gold coin for enlightenment? Ikkyu asked, stroking his beard thoughtfully. The charlatan's eyes lit up with greed, though he maintained his spiritual salesman demeanor. "Yes, venerable master, the same enlightenment that takes decades to achieve through traditional methods. I offer it instantly, guaranteed, to everyone's amazement, including the charlatans." Ikkyu reached into his robes and produced a gold coin. "This sounds like an excellent bargain," he said, placing the coin on the stall counter. "I'll take 1 enlightenment, please." The crowd pressed closer, whispers rippling through the onlookers. The charlatan found himself in an unexpected predicament. He had never imagined someone would actually pay, especially not a genuine Zen master. Panicking slightly, he fumbled through his belongings, looking for something, anything, to give in exchange for the coin. Finally, his hands closed around a small mirror he used for grooming. Desperate to complete the transaction, he handed it to Ikkyu with great ceremony. "Here is your enlightenment, master. Look deeply and all will be revealed. Ikkyu accepted the mirror with apparent reverence and gazed into its surface. For a long moment, he studied his own reflection, his weathered face, his knowing eyes, his slightly amused expression. Then, to everyone's surprise, he burst into delighted laughter. "Excellent," he declared, raising the mirror toward the sky, "worth every coin. This is indeed the most direct teaching I've encountered in years," the crowd murmured in confusion. The charlatan, emboldened by what seemed like validation from a respected teacher, puffed up with pride. "Master, I am gratified that you recognize the profound enlightenment I've provided. Tell us, what great wisdom did you discover?" Ika's laughter grew even more joyous. "I discovered that a fool and his money are soon parted. And I am that fool." He laughed again, tears streaming down his cheeks. "For one gold coin. This man has shown me my own face and reminded me that enlightenment cannot be bought, sold, or possessed. The greatest teaching often comes from the most unexpected teachers." The crowd began to chuckle as understanding dawned. Ikkyu bowed deeply to the charlatan. "Thank you, friend, for this perfect demonstration of wisdom appearing through folly." He set the mirror gently on the counter and walked away, still chuckling. The charlatan stood stunned, holding the gold coin and staring at the mirror. Something had shifted inside him during this exchange, watching a genuine master find wisdom in what he knew was a deception had cracked something open in his heart. For the first time in years, he felt ashamed not just of being caught, but of the emptiness that had driven him to such deception in the first place. Years later, that same charlatan would be found sweeping the floors at Ika's temple, having become one of his most devoted students. When asked about his transformation, he would say, "Master Ikkyu bought my enlightenment and then gave it back to me freely. I finally understood that what I was trying to sell I didn't have, and what I was trying to buy I already possessed." Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Three things cannot be long hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth." Here we discover the profound teaching that wisdom often appears through the most unlikely circumstances, and that genuine understanding cannot be commodified or transferred, but only recognized within ourselves. Why are we so susceptible to the idea that enlightenment can be acquired from external sources? Zen Buddhism points to our deep conditioning toward transactional thinking, the belief that spiritual realization works like commerce, where we can exchange effort, money, or devotion for guaranteed results. This gaining mind approaches awakening as something we don't have that we need to get, rather than recognizing it as our essential nature, temporarily obscured by conditioning. Notice how often we fall into this trap in subtler ways. We might shop for the perfect meditation technique, the right spiritual book, or the most enlightened teacher, imagining that the correct external formula will deliver the inner transformation we seek. While tools and guidance can certainly support our practice, the fundamental shift always happens within our own recognition. The charlatan's mirror accidentally provided what countless expensive workshops and elaborate practices often miss: direct confrontation with what is already here. Ika's reflection showed him nothing he didn't already possess. Yet in that moment of seeing clearly, the very ordinariness became extraordinary. This is what Zen calls original face, not some special spiritual state, but our natural awareness before it gets decorated with concepts and seeking. The deeper teaching emerges through Ika's response to being fooled. Rather than anger or embarrassment, he found genuine delight in recognizing his own gullibility. This demonstrates what Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi called don't know mind. The willingness to be surprised, to learn from unexpected sources, and to find wisdom even in our mistakes. Consider your own relationship with spiritual seeking. How much energy do you spend looking for the right method, teacher, or experience to provide what you imagine you're missing? Can you sense the difference between skillful learning and desperate acquisition? Ik's story suggests that wisdom often comes not through getting what we think we want, but through clearly seeing the futility of trying to possess what is already our birthright. Zen Master Lingi taught, "If you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him." This shocking statement points to the same truth I discovered. Enlightenment cannot be received from outside ourselves, not even from the most perfect teacher or teaching, any spiritual authority that claims to possess what we lack is ultimately pointing us away from our own innate wisdom. The charlatan's eventual transformation reveals another layer of the teaching. His years of pretending to sell enlightenment had actually prepared him to recognize it when it was freely offered. His intimate familiarity with spiritual concepts, even used deceptively, became the very foundation for authentic understanding. Once his heart opened to genuine practice, the Buddha said, "By three things the wise person may be known: what acts they encourage, what acts they discourage, and what acts they overlook." Ik's wisdom lay not in avoiding the charlatan's deception, but in finding truth within it. He encouraged the man's offering by paying for it, discouraged attachment to outcomes by laughing at his own foolishness, and overlooked the intended fraud by recognizing the unintended teaching. Tonight, as you reflect on your own spiritual journey, can you appreciate the unexpected teachers that have appeared along the way? Perhaps someone you initially judged or dismissed offered you insights that more obvious sources missed. What would it mean to approach tomorrow with Ik's openness to finding wisdom in the most unlikely packages? As the Buddha taught, when you realize how perfect everything is, you will tilt your head back and laugh at the sky. In recognizing that enlightenment cannot be bought or sold, we discover it has been freely available all along, reflected perfectly in whatever mirror we happen to be holding. Let us now turn to our next story, one that reveals how broken things often serve more clearly than perfect ones. This is the monastery bell that wouldn't ring. High in the mountains of rural Japan, Shunri Temple had served the surrounding villages for over 300 years. Its bronze bell, cast by master craftsmen generations ago, had called countless practitioners to morning meditation and evening reflection. The sound of that bell carried across the valleys, marking the rhythms of monastic life and offering comfort to all who heard its deep, resonant tone. But one winter morning, after a particularly harsh storm, the bell developed a crack. When struck, instead of producing its traditional, rich, penetrating sound, it made only a dull thud audible within the temple grounds, but lacking the carrying power to reach the surrounding communities. The monks were dismayed. How could they properly call people to practice without their bell's voice reaching across the mountain valleys? Master Sangai, the temple's elderly abbot, examined the crack and estimated the cost of repair. It would require taking the bell to the distant city, an expensive undertaking that would drain the temple's modest funds. The monks began organizing to raise money for the restoration, eager to return their daily practice to its full dignity. After weeks of careful saving and small donations from villagers, The monks had finally collected enough gold to restore their bell. They presented the money to Master Sengai with pride and relief. "Master, we can finally repair our bell and restore proper calling to practice." But the next day, a family of refugees appeared at the temple gates, parents with 3 small children traveling to escape famine. In their home province, they were thin, exhausted, and had been walking for weeks. Master Senai immediately welcomed them, and that evening, he used the bell restoration fund to buy food, warm clothing, and supplies for their continued journey. The monks watched in frustration as their carefully gathered money disappeared, but said nothing out of respect for their teacher. They began collecting funds again, working extra hours, copying sutras for sale, and accepting additional manual labor in nearby villages. 2 months later, they had again accumulated enough for the bell repair. But that very week, an elderly wandering monk arrived at the temple, ill with fever and needing medical attention. Once again, Master Sengai spent the bell fund, this time on medicine and care for the sick traveler. When this happened a 3rd time, the money going to help a village family whose house had burned down, the monks finally confronted their teacher. "Master Sengai," the headam said, respectfully but firmly, "how can we fulfill our duty to call people to practice without a proper bell? The crack makes it useless for reaching anyone beyond our walls. Our practice feels incomplete without the traditional calling." Master Sengai listened thoughtfully to their concerns. That evening, he struck the cracked bell at the usual time for evening meditation. Though it produced only its muffled thud, something remarkable happened. Instead of the usual handful of villagers who occasionally joined their practice, dozens of people appeared on the mountain path, climbing toward the temple in the gathering dusk. Word had spread throughout the region about the temple, where no traveler went hungry, where the sick received care, and where the monks' bell fund somehow always found its way to those in greatest need. People came not because they heard a bronze bell calling across the valleys, but because they had heard something far more compelling, the sound of compassion in action. As the crowd settled into the meditation hall, far more people than had ever responded to the perfect bell. Master Sengai smiled at his students. "You see," he said gently, "sometimes a broken bell calls more clearly than a perfect one. Our cracked bell cannot reach distant ears, but our open hearts have reached distant hearts." "Which call do you think the Buddha would prefer?" The head monk bowed deeply. "Master, I understand now. We were so focused on the form of calling that we missed the essence of what calls people to Dharma. The bell's voice was beautiful, but our actions have become an even clearer invitation." "Yes," Sengai replied. "A perfect bell announces meditation time. A broken bell that feeds the hungry announces the Dharma itself. The cracked bell was never repaired and still hangs in Shunryu Temple today. Visitors often comment on its unusual dull tone, and the monks smile as they tell the story of how brokenness became the temple's greatest teaching. Ancient Buddhist wisdom tells us, when you can do nothing, what can you do? The story points us toward understanding that our perceived limitations often become doorways to more authentic expression of our deepest values. Why do we assume that broken things must be fixed before they can serve their purpose? Zen Buddhism reveals our unconscious attachment to perfectionism, the belief that only flawless conditions can produce genuine spiritual benefit. We postpone compassionate action while waiting for ideal circumstances, proper resources, or complete understanding. Meanwhile, opportunities to embody wisdom pass by unnoticed. Consider how often you delay expressing generosity, creativity, or love because the conditions don't seem quite right. Perhaps you wait to help others until you feel more financially secure. Postpone sharing your gifts until you've perfected them, or hesitate to begin spiritual practice until you have the proper equipment or environment. Master Sangay's story suggests that our willingness to act compassionately with whatever we have available often serves more powerfully than waiting for perfect circumstances. The cracked bell represents what Buddhism calls skillful means, the recognition that the most effective Dharma teaching adapts fluidly to actual conditions rather than insisting on ideal forms. The temple's traditional role was to call people to formal practice. But when that became impossible, an even deeper calling emerged. Their limitations forced them to discover more direct ways of embodying Buddhist principles. This points to a profound truth about spiritual practice. Our obstacles often contain our teachings. The very thing that seems to prevent us from practicing correctly might be precisely what develops authentic wisdom. A meditation student who struggles with concentration might develop exceptional compassion for others' difficulties. Someone who lacks time for formal retreat might discover mindfulness through caring for family members. Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh teaches about interbeing, the recognition that our individual awakening is inseparable from the well-being of all beings. Master Sangay understood this deeply. Repairing the bell would have served the monk's sense of proper practice, but using that same energy to relieve suffering served the Buddha's deeper intention. Notice how the broken bell actually improved the temple's function. Instead of a few villagers occasionally joining practice when they happened to hear the bell's call, dozens of people were drawn by something far more compelling: the lived example of Buddhist compassion. The temple's reputation for meeting human need with open-hearted generosity became a Dharma teaching that reached far beyond the range of any bronze bell. This illustrates what Zen calls the sound of one hand clapping. The paradox that sometimes our greatest effectiveness comes through embracing apparent limitation rather than fighting it. The monks initially saw only what they had lost, their traditional calling capacity. But Master Sangay recognized what they had gained: an opportunity to demonstrate that Dharma is not about perfect forms, but about perfect responsiveness to actual conditions. The Buddha said, "Generosity brings happiness at every stage of its expression." We experience joy in forming the intention to be generous. We experience joy in the actual act of giving something, and we experience joy in remembering the fact that we have given. Master Sangay repeated choice to prioritize immediate compassion over temple restoration embodied this teaching completely. Consider the cracked bells in your own life, the areas where things don't work as you think they should. Perhaps physical limitations that force you to find new ways of contributing, financial constraints that teach you to discover richness in simplicity, relationship challenges that develop your capacity for patience and understanding, career setbacks that redirect you toward more meaningful work. What if these apparent obstacles are actually invitations to discover more authentic expressions of your deepest values? The story also reveals something profound about community and influence. The temple's impact on the surrounding region multiplied exponentially once they began prioritizing service over symbolism. People were attracted not to perfected spiritual displays, but to genuine embodiment of spiritual principles. This suggests that our perceived inadequacies often make us more relatable and helpful to others who are also struggling with imperfect conditions. Zen. Teacher Charlotte Jobeck observed, "We are not going to be perfect. We're going to make mistakes. The question is, what do we do when we make mistakes?" Master Sineya's approach suggests that the most skillful response to limitation is not always to fix it, but sometimes to discover what wants to emerge through it. Modern research on post-traumatic growth confirms what Buddhist teachers have long understood. Our most significant limitations and losses often catalyze our greatest contributions. People who have experienced financial hardship may develop extraordinary generosity. Those who have faced illness often become healers. Individuals who have struggled with addiction frequently become the most effective counselors. Our broken places become our serving places. The cracked bell continues hanging in the temple today as a permanent reminder that effectiveness and perfection are not synonymous. Every time visitors comment on its unusual sound, the teaching spreads further. The floor has become the temple's most powerful Dharma talk, reaching people who might never have been touched by conventional Buddhist instruction. This points to a revolutionary understanding of spiritual practice. Our genuine service to others often matters more than our personal attainment of special states or experiences. The monks thought they needed a perfect bell to fulfill their spiritual duty, but they discovered that feeding hungry travelers and caring for sick wanderers was actually a more direct expression of Buddha's teachings than any ritualized calling to formal practice. Tonight, as you consider the areas of your life that feel broken, incomplete, or inadequate, can you sense possibilities for service that exist precisely because of these limitations? Perhaps your financial constraints allow you to understand and help others who are struggling economically. Maybe your emotional sensitivity, which sometimes feels overwhelming, enables you to offer comfort to those who are suffering. What if your greatest vulnerabilities are actually your most profound qualifications for helping others? As the Buddha taught, thousands of candles can be lit from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared. Master Sengai understood that the temple's broken bell could light thousands of candles of compassion, creating a calling that reached far deeper than any perfect bronze voice ever could. In accepting our cracks and limitations, we often discover that brokenness itself can become a form of beautiful music, not despite its imperfection, but because of the authentic humanity it reveals. Sometimes the most powerful Dharma emerges not from polished presentations, but from our willingness to serve wholeheartedly with whatever we actually have available. Let us now explore a story about the invisible burdens we carry through life. This is the tale of the empty backpack. In a serene monastery garden where morning dew glistened on carefully tended paths, a young seeker approached his teacher with a question weighing heavily on his heart. His eyes reflected both determination and confusion as he bowed respectfully. "Master," he said, "I wish to understand my path on earth better. Why do I seem to carry my past and relive it again and again? Why can't I get past my past?" The master studied the young man with compassionate eyes, then gestured toward an intricate maze of translucent silk panels, shimmering in the garden's filtered sunlight. "Go forward into the maze," he said, reaching for a leather backpack. but carry this as you walk. It will help you stay focused. Be careful though, as it is quite heavy. The young man accepted the backpack, initially surprised by how easily the master handed it over. But the moment it settled into his grasp, he gasped. The weight was extraordinary, forcing him to bend forward. Inside the silken labyrinth, he immediately encountered solid walls. Through the translucent material, he could see other seekers navigating their paths like distant ghosts. No matter which direction he turned, every path seemed blocked. Exhausted, he sat down to think. Others are clearly ahead of me, he thought. Should I cheat and crawl under the silk? After wrestling with these thoughts, he chose integrity. As he stood with renewed resolve, an opening magically appeared. Progress felt rewarding until he faced another wall. This time, good intentions yielded no results. The backpack's weight became unbearable, cutting into his shoulders. What could be so heavy yet feel so soft? Overcome with curiosity, he removed the pack and peered inside. It was completely empty. Yet when he lifted it again, the weight remained undeniable. As he placed it back on his shoulders, a voice whispered clearly, "Look inside of you, young man, for the weight lies there." Suddenly, memories flooded his consciousness, his childhood tormentors, accumulated hurts and resentments carried for years. As he relived each painful experience, the backpack grew heavier. Then understanding dawned. I am the weight. I carry the burden of that which troubles me. With this insight, he began the work of forgiveness. I forgive you wherever you are, he found himself saying. Immediately, the pack lightened and new pathways opened as sunlight warmed his face, and he remembered moments of love. The weight continued diminishing until the backpack felt weightless. Finally, surrounded by solid silk walls, he sat in meditation. I am the light and the way. I recognized that I was the impediment, not anyone else. At these words, his feet began rising from the earth. He floated above the maze, seeing how others remained trapped by darkness in their own packs. With a thought, he found himself beside his teacher outside the labyrinth. "Master," he said, his face radiant, "I discovered that my darkness caused my weight, and my lightness freed me to fly." The master smiled knowingly. "What do you feel, young one? Do you feel freed?" Without waiting for an answer, he walked away. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned. This ancient teaching illuminates the profound truth revealed in the empty backpack story. We are the creators of our own burdens. What emerges from this tale is recognition that our past does not imprison us. Our relationship to our past does. The young seeker discovered that suffering came not from what others had done, but from his unwillingness to release those experiences. The empty backpack represents the invisible weight of unprocessed emotions and unhealed wounds we carry through life. Why do we cling so tenaciously to our pain? First is our identification with wounds. We derive identity from grievances, thinking, I am someone who was wronged rather than I experienced wronging, but am not defined by it. Second is our addiction to the familiar. Even painful emotions become comfortable because they're known. Third is our misunderstanding of forgiveness, believing it means condoning harmful behavior rather than freeing ourselves from resentment's prison. Consider how this plays out daily. The colleague who received credit for your idea still triggers anger. The parent who criticized you decades ago still influences your self-talk. Each is an invisible item in your backpack weighing you down. Zen teacher Jack Cornfield taught, "Forgiveness is giving up all hope of having had a different past. We cannot change what happened, but we can change our relationship to what happened. The energy spent maintaining grievances could be redirected toward creating the life we actually want. The floating represents lightness available when we release psychological burdens. This isn't about bypassing pain, but processing experiences fully and choosing freedom over familiarity, growth over grievance. Tonight, as you prepare for rest, what invisible weight might you be carrying? Perhaps it's time to examine what you've been holding on to and ask, does this serve my highest good, or is it time to set it down? As the Buddha taught, you yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. The path to freedom begins with radical self-forgiveness and willingness to travel light through life's inevitable challenges. Now let us explore a story about the power of belief and the destiny we create through faith itself. This is the tale of the general and the coin that revealed truth. A Japanese general faced an impossible situation. His army was greatly outnumbered by enemy forces. The terrain favored his opponents, and by every conventional measure of military strategy, the coming battle should result in devastating defeat. Yet something deep within him remained convinced that victory was possible. Perhaps it was intuition. Perhaps it was desperate hope. But he felt certain that his cause was just, and his troops, though fewer in number, possessed a fighting spirit that could overcome the odds. The problem was his soldiers. They could count as well as he could, and they had eyes to see the massive force array against them. Fear rippled through their ranks like a contagion. Doubt clouded their faces. Whispered conversations filled with pessimism spread through the camp, and the general could sense that their morale was crumbling before the battle had even begun. He knew that an army, convinced of its own defeat, would indeed be defeated, regardless of any other factors. Technical skill, superior weapons, even numerical advantage means nothing when soldiers have already surrendered in their hearts. But an army that truly believed in its victory could accomplish seemingly impossible things through the sheer force of that conviction. On the morning of the battle, as they marched toward their destiny, the general led his troops to a small religious shrine that stood beside the road. This was a place where countless warriors had stopped over the centuries to pray before facing uncertain fate. The general gathered his men around him and led them in earnest prayer, asking for divine blessing and protection in the coming fight. When the prayers were finished, the general reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple coin. He held it high so that every soldier could see it clearly. "My brothers," he called out, his voice carrying across the assembled ranks, "we have prayed, and now we will let heaven itself reveal our destiny. I will toss this coin into the air. If it lands heads, we are fated to win this battle. If it lands tails, we are destined to lose. Let us discover what the gods have decided for us." The soldiers pressed closer, their breathing shallow with anticipation. Everything seemed to depend on this single moment. This one flip of metal spinning through the morning air. The general tossed the coin high, and every eye followed its arc as it rose, hung suspended for an instant against the sky, then fell back down to earth. The coin landed and lay still in the dust. It was heads. A cheer erupted from the troops that could probably be heard for miles. Soldiers who had been grim and fearful moments before now laughed with joy and embraced each other with renewed confidence. The gods had spoken. Victory was assured. Their cause was blessed by heaven itself. Filled with this divine confidence, the soldiers attacked their enemies with such fierce determination and coordinated power that they achieved exactly what the coin had predicted. Against all odds, they won a decisive victory, routing forces much larger than their own, and securing a triumph that would be remembered for generations. After the battle, as the general walked among his celebrating troops, his lieutenant approached him with wonder in his eyes. "General," the lieutenant said, "what an incredible thing! The coin revealed our true destiny, just as you said it would. Surely, no human power can change what heaven has decreed." "You are absolutely right," the general replied with a knowing smile. He reached into his pocket and withdrew the coin, holding it so his lieutenant could examine it closely. "No one can change destiny." The lieutenant looked at the coin and gasped. Both sides showed heads. The Buddha once said, "All that we are is the result of what we have thought. The mind is everything. What we think, we become." Here we discover the profound truth that destiny is not something that happens to us, but something we create through the power of our own beliefs and expectations. Why do we so readily assume that fate is beyond our influence, when our own minds play such a crucial role in shaping what unfolds? Zen Buddhism teaches that while we cannot control all external circumstances, we have tremendous power over the internal conditions that determine how we respond to whatever arises. The general understood something profound about human psychology and the nature of reality itself. He knew that his soldiers' belief in victory was more important than their numerical disadvantage. He recognized that confidence, determination, and fighting spirit could overcome superior numbers when those qualities were genuinely present. But here is the deeper teaching. The general didn't simply manipulate his troops through deception. He created the conditions that allowed their natural courage and strength to emerge. The soldiers possessed the ability to fight brilliantly all along. They simply needed to believe in themselves and their cause. Consider your own relationship with destiny and possibility. How often do you assume that outcomes are predetermined, that success or failure is beyond your influence? The general's two-headed coin represents the power we all possess to tip the scales in favor of positive outcomes through the quality of our engagement with life. This doesn't mean we can control everything through positive thinking, or that believing in something makes it automatically true. The soldiers still had to fight the battle. They still had to demonstrate actual skill and courage. But their belief in victory created the psychological conditions that allowed their best qualities to manifest. In Zen practice, we learn to work skillfully with both effort and surrender, both intention and acceptance. We recognize that while we cannot dictate specific outcomes, we can profoundly influence the energy and attention we bring to any situation. This quality of engagement often determines whether we experience success or failure, regardless of external circumstances. Zen Master Hangpo taught, "The foolish reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see." The general was wise enough to see that his soldiers' thoughts about the battle were more influential than their thoughts about their numerical disadvantage. He worked with the reality of psychology rather than fighting against it. Look deeply at the various challenges and opportunities in your own life. Where might you be carrying a tails mentality, assuming defeat before you fully engaged, focusing on obstacles rather than possibilities, letting fear determine your level of effort. And where might you need to create your own two-headed coin, a practice or perspective that consistently orients you toward positive engagement, regardless of circumstances? The Buddha taught, "We are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world." This isn't magical thinking, but recognition of the creative power of consciousness itself. When we approach situations with genuine confidence, clarity, and commitment, we often discover capabilities we didn't know we possessed. Tonight, as you consider the battles you're facing and the outcomes you're hoping for, can you find your own version of the general's wisdom? Can you create internal conditions that support your highest possibilities rather than your deepest fears? Can you recognize that while you cannot control destiny, you have profound influence over the beliefs and attitudes that shape how destiny unfolds through you? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared. The general's confidence lit the flame of belief in every soldier's heart. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is create the conditions that allow others and ourselves to discover the strength that was there all along. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us explore a story about transforming our relationship with suffering. This is the tale of the salt and the lake. In a quiet monastery, nestled among rolling hills, there lived an aging master renowned for his patience and wisdom. Among his students was a young apprentice whose heart had become heavy with complaints about life's difficulties. Each morning, the apprentice would arrive with fresh grievances. "Master, why is life so hard? Yesterday, my meditation was disturbed by noise. Today, my back aches from the hard floor. When will this suffering end?" His voice carried the weight of someone who had catalogued every small discomfort until they had grown into an overwhelming burden. The master listened with infinite patience, but as days turned to weeks, he recognized that words alone would not shift his student's perspective. One crisp morning, as golden sunlight streamed through their simple dwelling, the master made an unusual request. "My dear student," he said gently, "I need you to go to the kitchen and bring me some salt. Just a handful will suffice." The apprentice, puzzled by the simple task, nonetheless obeyed. He returned with cupped palms containing coarse white crystals. "Now," the master instructed, producing a small glass of water, "place all of that salt into this glass and drink it." The young man hesitated. "Master, that seems like far too much salt for such a small amount of water." "Trust the process," the master replied. "Drink." The apprentice poured the salt into the glass, watching the crystals dissolve into a cloudy, unappetizing mixture. He lifted it to his lips and took a large gulp, immediately grimacing as the intensely bitter taste filled his mouth. "How does it taste?" the master asked. "Bitter," the apprentice spat, "terribly, overwhelmingly bitter. I can barely stand it." The master chuckled softly. "Excellent. Now bring that same amount of salt and come with me." Together they walked in contemplative silence until they reached the shores of a pristine mountain lake. The water stretched before them like a mirror, reflecting the sky so perfectly that it was difficult to tell where earth ended and heaven began. "Now," the master said, "place this handful of salt into the lake." The apprentice waded into the shallow water and opened his hands, watching as the salt crystals scattered across the lake's surface, quickly dissolving without leaving any visible trace. "Drink from the lake," the master instructed. The young man cupped the lake water in his hands and brought it to his lips. The water was clean, refreshing, with the pure taste of mountain streams. "How does it taste?" the master asked. "Matcha," the apprentice replied, genuinely surprised. "Clean and pure." "Do you taste the salt?" the master inquired gently. The student paused, paying careful attention. "No," he said slowly. "I don't taste any salt at all." The master sat beside his student on a smooth stone at the water's edge. His weathered hands reached out to clasp the young man's hands in profound tenderness. "My dear student," the master said, "the pain of life is pure salt, no more, no less. The amount of pain in existence remains constant, but the amount of bitterness we experience depends entirely on the container we put that pain into." The apprentice listened with new understanding. "When you are in pain," the master continued, "the only thing you can truly control is your response. You can choose to be a small glass where every grain of salt overwhelms your senses, or you can choose to enlarge your sense of things to become like this vast lake where the same salt dissolves harmlessly into something much greater." The master paused. "Stop being a glass, my friend. Become a lake." The Buddha once said, "Pain is certain. Suffering is optional." This fundamental teaching reveals the heart of our relationship with difficulty. We cannot eliminate the challenges woven into human existence, but we have tremendous power over how that pain affects us. What emerges from this story is understanding about consciousness itself. Our awareness is not fixed in size. It can contract into the narrow confines of a glass, where every difficulty looms enormous, or it can expand into the spaciousness of a lake, where the same difficulties become manageable. Why do we often choose to be the glass rather than the lake? First is our tendency toward pain myopia, becoming so focused on discomfort that it fills our entire awareness. Second is our habit of story proliferation, taking a single painful event and creating elaborate narratives about how unfair life is. Third is the comparing mind, measuring our pain against an imaginary standard of how life should be. The lake perspective doesn't minimize genuine pain or suggest passivity. Rather, it offers a skillful way of relating to inevitable challenges that doesn't compound them with unnecessary suffering. From late consciousness, we can respond to problems more creatively because we're not overwhelmed. Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh taught, "Thanks to impermanence, everything is possible." From the lake perspective, we remember that everything arises and passes away within the vast space of awareness. Today's crisis becomes tomorrow's memory. We become a lake through practices that naturally expand awareness. Meditation teaches us to rest in spacious presence. Gratitude helps us notice experiences beyond immediate difficulties. Service reminds us that our pain is part of shared human experience. Tonight, as you reflect on current challenges, can you sense the difference between experiencing them from glass consciousness versus lake consciousness? What would it feel like to allow your awareness to expand beyond the immediate intensity of difficulties, to include the vast context of this moment? As the Buddha taught, if you want to know your mind, sit down and observe it. If your mind is clear, happiness will come. The clarity he speaks of is not the absence of salt, but the spaciousness to hold it skillfully. In becoming lakes rather than glasses, we discover that pain can become a gateway to deeper compassion and freedom. Our next story reveals the profound difference between spiritual performance and authentic understanding. This is the teaching of the head that wished to be severed. in the great monastery of Chao, where hundreds of monks gathered daily for meditation and study. The morning routines followed ancient rhythms. After the pre-dawn sitting, as the first light touched the mountain peaks surrounding the monastery, monks would disperse to their various duties, some to the gardens, others to the kitchens, still others to copying sacred texts or maintaining the buildings. One particular morning, the venerable abbot Cho made his customary walk through the monastery grounds, checking on the well-being of his students and the condition of his presence was both gentle and penetrating. Monks never knew when their most casual words might become profound teachings, or when their deepest spiritual insights might be revealed as mere intellectual concepts. As he passed behind the main meditation hall, a building where the community gathered twice daily for silent sitting, the abbot noticed a young monk sitting alone in the shadow of the wooden structure. The monk appeared to be engaged in some form of practice, though he was apart from the scheduled community activities. "Brother," Chao called softly, approaching with the quiet steps that had become second nature through decades of mindful walking. "Where have all the virtuous ones gone?" The question seemed simple enough, almost like casual conversation. But those familiar with Choko's teaching style recognized the subtle depth in his inquiry. Was he asking about physical location, spiritual attainment, or something else entirely? The young monk looked up with an expression of confident understanding. He had been at the monastery for several years and prided himself on grasping the essential points of Zen teaching. This seemed like an opportunity to demonstrate his comprehension of the Dharma. "They have all gone to work," the monk replied, matter-of-factly, gesturing toward the various parts of the monastery, where his brothers were engaged in their daily tasks. His tone suggested that the answer was obvious. Virtuous people naturally engage in productive activity, rather than sitting idle. What happened next shocked the young monk completely. Without warning, Chowo reached into the folds of his robe and produced a sharp knife, its blade gleaming in the morning sunlight. But instead of threatening the monk, the abbot did something far more unsettling. With complete calmness, Chowo stretched out his own neck, exposing his throat to the blade, and handed the knife to the bewildered young monk. His voice remained gentle and conversational, as if he were making the most reasonable request in the world. "My responsibilities as abbot are many and demanding," he said with apparent sincerity. "I wonder if you could please cut off my head for me. It would be such a help in managing my duties." The young monk's eyes widened in horror. His hands trembled as he stared at the knife, now in his possession, and the exposed neck of his revered teacher. Everything about the situation contradicted his understanding of proper monastic behavior, spiritual teaching, and basic human decency. Unable to comprehend what was being asked of him, or why unable to see past the literal surface of the abbot's request to any deeper meaning, the terrified monk dropped the knife and ran. His feet carried him far from the meditation hall, far from the incomprehensible scene, his mind reeling with confusion and fear. Chao calmly picked up the fallen knife, tucked it back into his robe, and continued his morning walk with the same peaceful demeanor he had maintained throughout the entire encounter. As the Buddha observed, it is better to travel well than to arrive. What emerges from this story is a teaching about the vast difference between intellectual understanding and genuine realization. Why do we so often mistake conceptual knowledge for authentic wisdom? Zen Buddhism reveals that our thinking mind loves to collect spiritual ideas and organize them into neat categories, creating the illusion of understanding without the transformative experience of direct insight. The young monk's response, "They have all gone to work," represents the kind of dualistic thinking that separates spiritual practice from ordinary activity. His answer implied that virtue lies in doing productive tasks rather than sitting idly, revealing his assumption that awakened activity and rest exist in opposition to each other. But Chao Shou's teaching cuts much deeper than this surface interpretation. By offering his neck to the knife, he was asking a profound question. If the monk truly understood that all the virtuous ones had gone to work, what work was most essential? If responsibility truly mattered, what was the most compassionate response to suffering? Look deeply at your own spiritual assumptions. How often do we divide life into spiritual activities and mundane ones, important work and trivial tasks, sacred moments and ordinary time? This dualistic thinking keeps us from recognizing that every moment offers opportunities for awakened response. The abbot's gesture points toward the heart of Zen. Understanding, genuine compassion sometimes requires actions that transcend conventional thinking. When someone is truly suffering under the burden of responsibility, attachment, or spiritual seeking itself, what is the most loving response? Sometimes it requires cutting through the very thing that seems most precious: our concepts, our roles, even our sense of separate self. Zen master Lingyi taught, "If you meet the Buddha on the road, kill the Buddha." This famous saying points to the same radical teaching Chao offered. Any fixed idea about enlightenment, any attachment to spiritual roles or concepts becomes an obstacle to direct realization. True compassion sometimes requires destroying the very thing we think we're trying to protect. The young monk's terror and flight revealed how completely he missed this deeper level of teaching. He remained trapped in literal interpretation, unable to see past the surface of the abbot's words to their transformative invitation. His spiritual understanding, though articulate, remained purely conceptual. Consider your own relationship to spiritual responsibility and helping others. When someone asks for help with their suffering, do we offer concepts and advice, or do we respond from a deeper place of understanding? Are we willing to sacrifice our comfortable spiritual positions to meet others exactly where they are? This ancient wisdom illuminates the difference between talking about virtue and embodying it. The monk could identify where virtuous people go and what they do. But when faced with an opportunity for radical compassion, he fled. His knowledge remained divorced from spontaneous awakened action. In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called great doubt, a willingness to question even our most cherished spiritual understandings. This doubt isn't cynicism, but openness to discoveries that transcend our current conceptual frameworks. Are we prepared to have our spiritual certainties challenged, even destroyed, if it serves awakening? Tonight, as you encounter opportunities to help others with their burdens, can you sense the difference between offering what you think they need and responding from genuine understanding? Can you feel how true compassion sometimes requires cutting through your own comfortable assumptions about what constitutes appropriate spiritual behavior? Buddha spoke of this when he said, "In caring for others, you care for yourself. In caring for yourself, you care for others." The abbot's offer to sacrifice his own head points toward this non-dual understanding. When we truly see interconnection, the boundaries between self and other, helper, and helped begin to dissolve into spontaneous compassionate action. Now, let us explore a story about fearlessness and the power that comes from accepting what cannot be changed. This is the encounter between the general and the Zen master who could not be moved. During the violent civil wars that tore through feudal Japan, armies swept across the countryside like natural disasters, conquering villages and controlling territories through force and intimidation. When word spread that a particular warlord's army was approaching, most people would flee with whatever possessions they could carry, seeking safety in the mountains or with relatives in distant towns. In one small village, as the dreaded army drew near, the familiar pattern repeated itself. Families packed hastily, merchants closed their shops, and within hours, the streets that had been busy with daily life stood empty and silent. Everyone had fled. Everyone, that is, except the old Zen master who lived in the simple temple at the village center. When the conquering army arrived and found the village deserted, the general was surprised to discover smoke still rising from the temple chimney. Curious about who would have the audacity, or perhaps the foolishness, to remain when everyone else had fled, he decided to investigate this anomaly personally. The general approached the temple with several of his lieutenants, expecting to find either a frail old man too weak to flee, or perhaps someone who had been unable to escape in time. What he found instead was the Zen master sitting peacefully in his garden, tending to his plants, as if nothing unusual was happening around him. The general had grown accustomed to fear and submission wherever his army went. Village leaders would prostrate themselves before him, pleading for mercy and offering tribute in hopes of avoiding destruction. Citizens would cower and flee at the mere sight of his soldiers. This old man's calm indifference to his presence was both puzzling and irritating. When he wasn't treated with the deference and submissiveness to which he was accustomed, the general's face darkened with growing anger. Here was someone who didn't seem to understand the gravity of the situation or respect the power he represented. "You fool!" the general shouted, his voice echoing through the empty courtyard as he reached for his sword. His elaborate armor gleamed menacingly in the afternoon light, and his hand gripped his weapon with practiced ease. "Don't you realize that you are standing before a man who could run you through without blinking an eye?" The threat that had terrorized countless others left the master completely unmoved. He continued, his careful tending of a small flowering bush, his hand steady and his expression serene. When he finally looked up at the general, it was with the same calm attention he had shown before, as if greeting any ordinary visitor to his garden. "And do you realize," the master replied with perfect equanimity, "that you are standing before a man who can be run through without blinking an eye?" The general stood speechless, his sword half drawn. His anger suddenly dissolved into something approaching awe. In all his years of warfare and conquest, he had encountered many forms of courage, the desperate bravery of cornered soldiers, the defiant rage of defeated enemies, the foolish boldness of young warriors. But he had never encountered anything like this: complete acceptance, without fear, total peace in the face of death. The master's response revealed something the general had never considered, that there could be a power greater than the ability to kill. And that was the complete absence of fear about being killed. Here was someone who had so fully accepted the temporary nature of existence that even the threat of immediate death held no power over him. Slowly, the general returned his sword to its sheath. Without another word, he turned and walked away from the temple, leaving the master to continue his gardening in peace. The village remained untouched by the war, not because of any military strategy or negotiated protection, but because of one man's absolute fearlessness. As the Buddha taught, all conditioned things are impermanent. Strive on with diligence. Here we discover the profound power that emerges when we fully accept this fundamental truth, rather than spending our lives trying to escape it. Why does complete acceptance of mortality create such presence and authority? Zen Buddhism reveals that most of our fear comes not from external threats, but from our desperate clinging to what is. When that clinging dissolves, the threats themselves lose their power to disturb our inner peace. The general's power came from others, fear of death and loss. But someone who has fully accepted the temporary nature of existence cannot be threatened with what he has already willingly released. The master's fearlessness wasn't bravado or indifference. It was the natural result of understanding impermanence so completely that even his own death held no terror. Consider your own relationship with threats and intimidation in daily life. How much of your fear comes from attachment to maintaining your current circumstances, preserving your reputation, or protecting your physical comfort? The master's response suggests that true invulnerability comes not from being untouchable, but from having nothing that can be taken away. This doesn't mean being passive or welcoming harm. The master wasn't seeking death or encouraging violence. Rather, his complete acceptance of mortality's inevitability freed him from the paralyzing fear that controls most people when facing genuine danger. The Buddha said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." The master's single response contained more power than any threat because it came from a place of absolute acceptance rather than resistance or fear. Tonight, as you consider the various pressures and threats you face, can you remember the master's profound response to the general's sword? Can you find the space where acceptance of impermanence creates not resignation, but a kind of unshakable presence that cannot be intimidated? Buddha's wisdom reminds us the whole secret of existence is to have no fear. True freedom comes not from avoiding danger, but from understanding so completely that we cannot ultimately be harmed, that external threats become powerless to disturb our essential peace. Let us continue with a story about the limits of understanding and the honesty of not knowing. This is the teaching of the Emperor and Master Gudo. The Emperor of Japan, a man accustomed to receiving definitive answers from his advisors and scholars, had arranged a private audience with Master Gudo, one of the most respected Zen teachers in the realm. The emperor came with genuine curiosity about spiritual matters, particularly questions about life, death, and what might lie beyond ordinary understanding. Seated in the formal chamber, where matters of state were usually discussed, the emperor felt comfortable, posing even the most profound questions to this renowned master. After all, if anyone would possess answers to life's deepest mysteries, surely it would be an enlightened Zen teacher who had spent decades in contemplation and practice. Master Gudo, the emperor, began with the directness that comes from a lifetime of authority. I have a question that has troubled many great minds throughout history. What happens to a man of enlightenment after death? Surely someone of your spiritual attainment would understand such matters. The emperor expected a profound discourse on the nature of consciousness after physical death. Perhaps insights into rebirth, karma, or the eternal nature of enlightened awareness. He was prepared to hear about subtle realms, the dissolution of individual consciousness, or other elevated teachings that would satisfy his curiosity about this ultimate mystery. Instead, Master Gudo looked at the emperor with complete equanimity and gave the most honest answer possible. How should I know? The emperor was taken aback. Here was a master, revered throughout the land for his wisdom, essentially admitting ignorance about what seemed like a fundamental spiritual question. But Master, the emperor pressed, somewhat incredulous. You are an enlightened teacher. Surely you must have special knowledge about such things. Gudo's response was immediate and perfectly logical. Yes, sir, but not a dead one. The simplicity of this exchange contains a profound teaching about the nature of genuine wisdom and the difference between authentic understanding and pretended knowledge, as the Buddha taught. I know nothing except the fact of my ignorance. This ancient wisdom illuminates the profound honesty that characterizes true spiritual maturity, the willingness to admit the limits of one's knowledge rather than pretending to understand what cannot be known from one's current position. Why do we expect spiritual teachers to have answers to questions that can only be resolved through direct experience? Zen Buddhism emphasizes the importance of distinguishing between conceptual knowledge and lived understanding, between what we can theorize about and what we can actually know. Master Gudo's response wasn't a failure of wisdom, but a demonstration of it. He refused to engage in speculation about experiences he hadn't had, even when pressed by someone in a position of great authority. His honesty revealed more wisdom than any elaborate theory about post-death consciousness could have provided. Consider how often in daily life we pretend to know things we don't actually know, whether it's offering confident opinions about complex social issues, giving definitive advice about other people's relationships, or claiming certainty about uncertain outcomes. We often feel pressured to appear knowledgeable rather than admitting the limits of our understanding. The emperor's assumption that enlightenment should include knowledge about death reflects a common misconception about spiritual development. We imagine that awakening provides a comprehensive database of cosmic information rather than a fundamental shift in how we relate to not knowing. In Zen practice, we cultivate what Suzuki Rashi called don't know mind, a state of open awareness that doesn't need to fill every gap in understanding with theories or beliefs. This isn't ignorance, but a wise recognition that direct experience is more valuable than second-hand information. Zen Master Linchi taught, there is nothing special to do, nothing special to learn. Enlightenment doesn't grant supernatural knowledge about matters beyond ordinary experience. A living master knows about living. What happens after death remains in the realm of speculation until one actually dies. The Buddha said, believe nothing merely because you have been told it, but whatsoever, after due examination and analysis, you find to be conducive to the good, the benefit, the welfare of all beings. That doctrine, believe and cling to even the Buddha, encouraged direct investigation over accepting claims based on authority. Gudo's teaching reveals the freedom that comes from releasing the need to have opinions about everything. How much mental energy do we waste constructing theories about things we cannot possibly know? How much suffering comes from worrying about scenarios we can only imagine. Look deeply at your own relationship with not knowing. Where do you pretend certainty to avoid the discomfort of uncertainty? What would change if you could say, "I don't know," with the same confidence that Master Gudo displayed? The emperor sought knowledge about death from someone who was vibrantly alive. But true wisdom might be found not in accumulating information about future experiences, but in fully engaging with present reality. The mystery of death is honored not by pretending to solve it, but by living authentically in the face of it. Tonight, as you encounter questions about the future, about others' motivations, or about cosmic mysteries, can you remember Master Gudo's honest simplicity? Can you find the courage to admit when you don't know, discovering that don't know mind might be wiser than all our clever theories? Buddha's wisdom reminds us the only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing in a world full of false certainties and confident ignorance. The Master's honest "how should I know" points toward a more genuine relationship with mystery, one that honors what cannot be known while fully embracing what can be directly experienced. Our next story reveals a profound truth about how attachment can poison the very thing we claim to love. This is the tale of the chrysanthemum garden. In the countryside of ancient Japan, where autumn mists drifted through carefully manicured estates, there lived a wealthy baron whose passion bordered on obsession. His mansion stood proudly among rolling hills, but it was the rear garden that captured his heart completely. There, row upon row of chrysanthemums bloomed in magnificent splendor, their colors ranging from deep purple to golden yellow to pristine white. The baron devoted endless hours to cultivating these flowers, studying each variety with scholarly intensity, nurturing each plant with parental tenderness. His knowledge was encyclopedic, his dedication absolute. Yet, this very devotion had transformed from love into something darker. The baron paid more attention to his chrysanthemums than to his wife and children. His household lived in constant fear, knowing that a single misstep near the precious flowers could result in severe punishment. Many retainers had felt his wrath for accidentally breaking off a blossom. The atmosphere had become oppressive, filled with anxiety and resentment. One autumn day, disaster struck. A faithful retainer, while hurrying to complete his duties, accidentally brushed against a prized chrysanthemum, breaking off its perfect bloom. When the baron discovered the damaged flower, his rage was volcanic. "Confinement," he roared. The retainer was immediately imprisoned for this innocent accident, but the punishment felt so disproportionate that the retainer's shame transformed into desperate anger. According to the warrior code, he resolved to protest through seppuku, ritual disembowelment, preferring death to such humiliation over a mere flower. Word of this tragedy reached Zen master Sengai, a teacher known for his wisdom and compassion. Understanding that a man's life hung in the balance over botanical beauty, Sengai hastened to the estate and successfully prevented the suicide. But the master knew that saving one life would not solve the deeper problem. Sengai devised a radical solution. On a rainy night, when the chrysanthemums were at their most glorious peak, he sneaked into the baron's garden, carrying a sharp sickle. Working methodically, in the darkness, he cut down every single chrysanthemum, hundreds of flowers representing years of cultivation. The sound awakened the baron, who rushed to his window and saw a shadowy figure in his beloved garden. Grabbing his sword, he ran outside alarm, demanding to know what this intruder was doing. Sengai stood calmly amid the devastation, surrounded by fallen blooms. Even weeds like this eventually become rank if they are not cut, he replied with perfect equanimity. In that moment, the Baron's obsession shattered like breaking glass, seeing his flowers reduced to mere weeds in the master's eyes. He suddenly understood the distortion in his perception. It was like awakening from a fever dream. From that night forward, the Baron never raised chrysanthemums again. The Buddha taught, attachment is the root of suffering. This ancient wisdom illuminates what the Baron discovered through Sangai, dramatic intervention. When we cling too tightly to anything, even beautiful things, we transform love into possession and beauty into burden. This profound truth reveals itself in the way attachment corrupts the very thing we claim to cherish. The Baron genuinely loved chrysanthemums, but his attachment had poisoned that love, turning appreciation into obsession, care into control, and beauty into a source of fear for everyone around him. Why do we confuse love with possession? Buddhism explains that the ego mind seeks security through control, attempting to make permanent what is inherently impermanent. True love appreciates without grasping, enjoys without owning, cares without controlling. But attachment love tries to freeze beauty in place, to make the beloved an extension of our own identity. Consider how this pattern manifests in modern relationships. Parents who love their children so intensely that they become controlling, suffocating the very growth they claim to support. Partners who love so possessively that they create jealousy and mistrust. Collectors who become so attached to possessions that they lose the joy of experiencing what they own. The chrysanthemums represent anything we elevate beyond its proper place in the natural order. This might be our career success, our physical appearance, our spiritual achievements, or our carefully curated lifestyle. When we become too attached, we create suffering not only for ourselves, but for everyone in our orbit. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi said, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This paradox points to the delicate balance between appreciation and attachment. We can love something fully while holding it lightly, caring deeply while remaining unattached to outcomes. Sengei's radical action demonstrates the sometimes shocking medicine required to break through deep-seated attachment patterns. Sometimes we need external circumstances to strip away what we're clinging to before we can see clearly loss, disappointment, and impermanence, while painful, often serve as teachers, revealing the difference between genuine love and possessive attachment. Notice that the Baron doesn't simply moderate his gardening. He stops completely. This suggests that sometimes the most skillful response to attachment is temporary, complete withdrawal, until we can relate to the object of attachment with greater freedom and wisdom. Tonight, as you reflect on your own life, what might be your chrysanthemum garden? What do you love so intensely that it creates stress, control, or suffering for yourself or others? Can you imagine appreciating these things fully while holding them more lightly? Buddha's wisdom reminds us in the end, only three things matter: how much you loved, how gently you lived, and how gracefully you let go of things not meant for you. True love sets free what it cherishes, trusting in the natural flow of arising and passing away. Let us continue our journey with a story about the transformative power of fearlessness and unconditional compassion. This is the tale of the thief and the Zen master. One quiet evening, as twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and gold. Zen master Shichiri Kojun sat in his simple home, reciting ancient sutras. His voice flowed rhythmically through the peaceful rooms. Each word a meditation, each breath a prayer. The soft glow of candlelight danced across the walls as he immersed himself completely in the sacred texts, finding deep tranquility in the familiar verses. Suddenly, the serenity was shattered. The front door burst open with a violent crash, and a desperate man entered, brandishing a sharp sword that gleamed menacingly in the candlelight. His eyes were wild with desperation, his clothes dirty and torn, his breathing heavy from running. He had clearly chosen this isolated house because he believed it would be an easy target. A peaceful monk would offer no resistance. Money or your life? The thief demanded, his voice trembling with the mixture of fear and aggression. He expected the old man to cower, to plead, to scramble frantically for whatever valuables he might have hidden away. But Shichiri didn't even look up from his sutra book. His voice remained calm and steady as he continued reciting for a moment before pausing to address the intruder. "Please don't disturb my practice," he said, with the same gentle tone he might use to ask someone to close a door. "If you need money, help yourself. It's in that drawer over there." He gestured casually toward a simple wooden chest, then immediately returned to his recitation, as if nothing unusual had occurred. The thief stood frozen, his sword still raised, completely bewildered. In all his years of stealing, he had never encountered such a reaction. No fear, no pleading, no anger, just matter-of-fact helpfulness, as if he were a neighbor who had stopped by to borrow something, shaking his head in confusion, but proceeding with his business. The thief moved to the indicated the drawer and began gathering the coins and small valuables he found there. The soft sound of the master's voice continued behind him, reciting sacred words as peacefully as if he were alone. Just as the thief was preparing to leave with his stolen goods, the master's voice called out again. "Wait," Shiri said, finally looking up from his book. "Please, don't take everything. I need some of that money to pay my taxes tomorrow. Leave a little for me, won't you?" The thief stared at him in amazement. Here was a man who was being robbed, calmly negotiating the terms of his own robbery as if they were conducting normal business. Almost without thinking, the thief returned some of the money to the drawer. As he turned to leave, certain that this strange encounter was finally over, the master's voice stopped him once more. "You took my money," Shichiri called out, his tone carrying a note of reproach, "and you didn't even thank me. That's quite rude, don't you think?" This final comment left the thief completely speechless. His sword hand began to shake. Never in his most violent encounters had he been so thoroughly unnerved. Here was a man who treated robbery as if it were a favor, who was more concerned about politeness than personal safety. "The thank you." The thief stammered and then fled into the night as quickly as his legs would carry him. Later, when the thief was caught and confessed to numerous crimes, including the incident at Shikiri's house, the master was called as a witness. The court officials expected him to demand justice to describe the terror and violation he had experienced. Instead, Shichiri spoke with the same calm clarity he had shown that evening. "This man did not steal anything from me," he testified. "I gave him the money freely. He even thanked me for it." Though it took a little reminding, the thief sitting in chains felt something break open in his chest as he heard these words. This man had not only shown him extraordinary kindness in the moment of the crime, but was now protecting him from the consequences. For the first time in years, tears came to his eyes. Not tears of self-pity or anger, but tears of recognition. He had encountered something he had never experienced before: love without conditions. Upon his release from prison, the former thief sought out the master and begged to become his student. Under Shikari's patient guidance, he learned to cultivate the same fearless compassion he had witnessed that night. Years later, through dedicated practice and the master's unwavering belief in his potential for transformation, he attained the deep peace and wisdom of enlightenment. As the Buddha observed, hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule. What emerges from this story is the revolutionary power of meeting violence with absolute peace, responding to taking with giving, and answering fear with love. Why do we instinctively believe that force must be met with force, that aggression requires defensive reaction? Zen Buddhism reveals that this pattern, while natural, often perpetuates the very conflicts it seeks to resolve. When we respond to hostility with hostility, we simply escalate the cycle of suffering. But when we respond with genuine compassion, not passive submission, but active love, we create space for transformation that wouldn't otherwise exist. Look deeply at your own experience. When someone approaches you with anger, criticism, or demand, what is your automatic response? Most of us immediately mobilize our defenses, preparing to protect ourselves through counterattack or withdrawal. But notice what happens in your body and mind during these defensive reactions. Does the tension decrease or increase? Does the conflict resolve or intensify? Shiri's response demonstrates what Zen calls skillful means, acting from wisdom rather than reflex. His fearlessness didn't come from being unaware of danger, but from understanding something profound about the nature of reality. He recognized that the thief's aggression arose from desperation and suffering, not from inherent evil. By refusing to see him as an enemy, Shichiri created the possibility for the thief to see himself differently. In Zen practice, we cultivate what might be called the courage of defenselessness. This doesn't mean being naive about genuine danger or allowing ourselves to be harmed unnecessarily. Rather, it means developing the confidence to respond to difficult situations from our highest wisdom rather than our most primitive instincts. The Buddha taught, in the end, just 3 things matter: how well we have lived, how well we have loved, how well we have learned to let go. Shiri embodied all 3 in his encounter with the thief. He lived from complete presence, loved without conditions, and let go of any attachment to his possessions or even his personal safety. Consider the people in your life who challenge you: the difficult colleague, the critical family member, the aggressive driver in traffic. What would it mean to meet their energy with the same kind of fearless compassion Shichiri showed? Not by agreeing with them or submitting to their demands, but by refusing to match their level of reactivity. By staying connected to your own center of peace, regardless of their behavior. Tonight, as you encounter your own moments of tension or conflict, can you remember the master who treated a robber as an honored guest? Can you find the space between stimulus and response, where choice lives, where you can decide to meet aggression with peace, taking with giving, fear with love? Buddha's wisdom reminds us better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. Sometimes, the most powerful response to violence is simply to remain unshakable in our commitment to compassion knowing that love has a transformative power that force can never match. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us explore a story about contentment and the nature of desire. This is the stone-cutter's journey. High in the mountain villages, there lived a simple stone cutter who had discovered the secret of happiness without knowing it. Each dawn, he would climb winding paths to the quarries, his tools balanced across his shoulders. As he worked among the stones, he would sing old mountain songs that echoed across the valleys. Though he was poor by society's measures, living in a modest hut with few possessions, the stone cutter desired nothing more than what he had. His simple life felt complete, the rhythm of his work, the beauty of the mountains, the satisfaction of honest labor. His heart held not a care in the world. One day he was called to work on the grand mansion of a wealthy nobleman. As he approached the estate, his eyes widened at the magnificence before him. Marble columns reached toward the sky. Gardens sprawled in perfect symmetry. For the first time in his life, the stone cutter felt the sharp pang of desire pierce his contentment. If only I were rich, he sighed. Then I would not have to earn my living in sweat and toil as I do now. To his amazement, a voice whispered from the stones, "Your wish has been granted. Henceforth, anything you desire will be given to you." He returned home that evening to find his humble hut replaced by a mansion, as magnificent as the nobleman's. Overwhelmed with joy, he abandoned his tools and began enjoying the luxurious life of the wealthy. But one hot afternoon, gazing from his ornate window, he saw the king's royal procession passing by. The monarch sat in cool shade, surrounded by noble men and servants, appearing serene and powerful above the common heat. How I wish I were a king myself, he thought, and immediately found himself reclining in silk cushions within the royal carriage. But the carriage proved warmer than expected. Even through thick walls, the sun's heat penetrated relentlessly. "I wish I were the sun," he declared, and found himself sending waves of light and heat across the universe. As the sun, he felt magnificent and all-powerful until thick storm clouds gathered, completely blocking his rays. I wished to be a cloud, and so he became a massive storm cloud, glorying in his power to block the sun. But as he transformed into falling rain, he encountered an enormous rock that blocked his path completely. A mere rock, more powerful than I. I wished to be a rock. Suddenly, he stood tall upon the mountainside, feeling he had achieved true permanence. But soon he heard chipping sounds at his base. Looking down, he saw a tiny human figure cutting chunks of stone away. A puny creature more powerful than me. I want to be a man again. And so he found himself once more, a stone cutter climbing familiar mountain paths. But now something had changed. As he shaped stones and felt mountain breezes, his heart swelled with deep contentment. His song returned richer than before, because he had learned to be content with exactly who he was. The Buddha once said, "Health is the greatest gift, contentment the greatest wealth." This ancient wisdom illuminates the endless cycle of wanting that keeps us from recognizing the abundance already present in our lives. Always believing happiness lies in the next transformation, each desire fulfilled only reveals the next desire, creating an endless cycle of dissatisfaction. The stone cutter's journey reveals the futility of seeking happiness through external circumstances. Consider your own versions of this cycle. I'll be happy when I get promoted, only to discover new stresses. I'll be content with more money, only to find greater wealth brings new worries. Each achievement reveals the next mountain to climb. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi said, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This paradox points to the heart of contentment, the ability to fully accept what is, while still engaging wholeheartedly with life's natural changes. The stone cutter's final transformation wasn't into something greater, but into appreciation for what he had always been. His work remained the same, but his relationship to life was completely transformed. Contentment isn't found in having different experiences, but in bringing different awareness to whatever experiences arise. Tonight, as you notice the mind's habitual reaching toward what's not here, can you experiment with the stone cutter's final wisdom? Can you find the song that emerges when you stop trying to be anything other than what you are? As the Buddha taught, contentment is natural wealth. Luxury is artificial poverty. The greatest transformation available isn't becoming something different, but recognizing the inherent completeness of what we already are. Let us continue our journey with a story about the unexpected wisdom found in laughter and the suffering we create through taking ourselves too seriously. This is the tale of the monk who discovered his true teacher. In a remote mountain monastery in ancient China, there lived a young monk who approached his spiritual practice with tremendous intensity. Every morning before dawn, he would rise for meditation, sitting in perfect posture for hours without moving. He studied the Buddhist texts with scholarly precision, memorizing sutras and debating philosophical points with fierce concentration. His fellow monks often remarked on his seriousness and dedication to the Dharma. One crisp autumn morning, while studying a particularly complex passage about the nature of emptiness, the young monk encountered something that completely baffled him. The text seemed to contradict everything he thought he understood about Buddhist philosophy. The words appeared clear enough individually, but their meaning together seemed to dissolve into paradox. The moment he thought, he grasped it. Determined to understand, he carefully marked the passage and made his way to the master's quarters. The old teacher sat in his simple room, sunlight streaming through paper windows, creating patterns of light and shadow on the wooden floor. "Venerable master," the monk said, bowing deeply, "I have encountered a teaching that I cannot comprehend. Could you please illuminate its meaning for me?" He recited the passage with careful precision, explaining his confusion and the various interpretations he had considered. The master listened attentively, nodding occasionally, his expression thoughtful and engaged. When the young monk finished his earnest explanation, something unexpected happened. The master's face suddenly broke into a broad smile, then quiet chuckling, and finally erupted into hearty, uncontrollable laughter. His whole body shook with mirth, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. The monk stood frozen, completely bewildered. This was not the response he had anticipated. Where he expected profound wisdom and careful explanation, he found only laughter. The master's amusement seemed to fill the entire room, echoing off the walls and growing even more intense. Without offering any explanation, the master stood up, still laughing, and walked out of the room, leaving the young monk alone with his confusion and growing distress. For the next 3 days, the monk could think of nothing else. The master's inexplicable laughter haunted him constantly. He barely touched his meals. His meditation was scattered and unfocused, and sleep came only in brief, restless intervals. The question consumed him entirely. Why had his sincere spiritual inquiry been met with such puzzling amusement? Other monks noticed his distressed state, but his responses to their concerns were vague and troubled. He felt humiliated, confused, and increasingly agitated. Had the master been mocking his understanding? Was his question somehow foolish? Did his years of dedicated practice mean nothing? Finally, unable to bear the torment any longer, he returned to the master's room. This time he didn't bow or recite passages. Instead, he spoke directly from his heart. Master, for 3 days, I have been deeply disturbed by your reaction to my question. I cannot eat, sleep, or meditate properly. Please, tell me, why did you laugh at my sincere seeking? Have I done something wrong? The master's expression became gentle and compassionate. He gestured for the young monk to sit beside him, then spoke with quiet clarity. Monk, do you know what your problem is? The master asked kindly. Your problem is that you are worse than a clown. The words hit the young monk like a physical blow. His eyes widened in shock and dismay. Venerable sir, how can you say such a thing? How can I be worse than a clown? I have dedicated my life to spiritual practice, to understanding the Buddha's teachings. I have sacrificed worldly pleasures and pursued wisdom with complete sincerity. How can you compare me to a mere entertainer? The master smiled warmly and explained, a clown's greatest joy comes from making people laugh. When others laugh, the clown feels fulfilled and happy. His entire purpose is to bring lightness and joy to the world. But you, when another person laughs, you feel disturbed, upset, and tormented. Tell me, are you not worse than a clown? At these words, understanding dawned like sunrise breaking through clouds. The young monk saw immediately how his attachment to being taken seriously had created his suffering. He had been so invested in his image as a dedicated practitioner that he couldn't receive the master's joy. The laughter hadn't been mockery. It had been pure delight at the beauty of the Dharma expressing itself through paradox. In that moment of recognition, the monk began to laugh. First quietly, then with growing freedom and joy. He laughed at his own seriousness, at his attachment to understanding, at the beautiful absurdity of seeking enlightenment so grimly. His laughter joined with the master's from 3 days earlier, and in that shared joy, understanding flowered naturally. As the Buddha observed, if you light a lamp for somebody, it will also brighten your path. The heart of this lesson lies in recognizing how our reactions to others reveal the state of our own minds. Why do we become disturbed when others express joy in ways we don't understand? Zen Buddhism points to several patterns that create this type of suffering. First is our attachment to being understood and validated. The young monk's disturbance stemmed not from the master's laughter itself, but from his need for his question to be received with the seriousness he felt it deserved. Second is our identification with our spiritual image. When we become attached to being seen as sincere seekers, dedicated practitioners, or wise students, we lose the spontaneity and openness that allows genuine learning. The monk's investment in his identity as a serious practitioner made him unable to receive the teaching that was being offered through laughter. Third is our limited understanding of how wisdom can be transmitted. We expect spiritual teaching to arrive in familiar forms, solemn explanations, careful analysis, traditional formats. But enlightenment often comes through unexpected doorways. A master's laughter, a child's innocent question, the sound of a bell, or a moment of complete ordinariness. Consider how often we miss teachings because they don't match our expectations. Perhaps someone's casual comment contains exactly the insight we need, but we dismiss it because the person seems less knowledgeable than us. Maybe life presents us with lessons through situations we find annoying or people we consider frivolous. Zen teacher Suzuki Rashi said, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few." The young monk's expertise had become a barrier to learning. His certainty about how spiritual teaching should look prevented him from receiving the profound lesson being offered through unexpected laughter. The story points us toward a fundamental question. Are we seeking understanding, or are we seeking to be understood? Are we open to wisdom arriving in any form, or do we require it to validate our preconceptions? The Master's laughter was a teaching about the joy inherent in the Dharma itself, the playful, spontaneous, beyond logic nature of awakened understanding. Tonight, as you encounter responses from others that don't match your expectations, can you remember the monk's revelation? Perhaps someone's laughter when you expected seriousness, their casualness when you hoped for depth, or their joy when you felt the situation called for gravity, might contain teachings you haven't yet recognized. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared." The Master's laughter was not diminishing the Dharma, but celebrating its inexhaustible joy. A joy the monk discovered he could share rather than resist. Let us continue on our journey with a cautionary tale about the perils of spiritual superiority. This is the story of the clever monkey. In ancient China, the Prince of Wu decided to take a pleasure boat to the famous Monkey Mountain, a place known for its abundant wildlife and scenic beauty. The prince, surrounded by his attendants and guards, approached the mountain with the casual confidence of royalty, expecting the natural world to accommodate his presence, just as his human subjects did. As soon as the monkeys dwelling in the forest caught sight of the royal party, they fled in terror. The sound of chattering filled the air as dozens of monkeys scrambled up into the highest branches of the trees, their natural instinct warning them to hide from these human intruders. The forest, which moments before had been alive with playful monkey calls, fell silent except for the rustling of leaves as the creatures sought safety in the treetops. However, one monkey remained completely unconcerned by the royal presence. This particular monkey seemed utterly fearless, continuing his acrobatic display with remarkable skill and apparent indifference to the danger below. He swung gracefully from branch to branch, performing elaborate leaps and displaying his dexterity as if putting on a show. His movements were fluid and confident, each gesture demonstrating his superior agility and intelligence compared to his cowering companions. The Prince of Wu watched this extraordinary display with growing annoyance. Here was a mere animal that dared to show no respect for royal authority, that seemed to mock the very presence of the prince through its casual dismissal of the obvious threat. The monkey key's confidence appeared to be a direct challenge to the prince's power. Deciding to teach this insolent creature a lesson, the prince drew his bow and shot an arrow directly at the monkey. But to the amazement of all present, the monkey dexterously caught the arrow in mid-flight, plucking it from the air as easily as one might catch a falling leaf. The monkey examined the arrow briefly, then tossed it aside with casual dismissal, as if such feats were nothing more than child's play. The prince's face darkened with rage at this humiliation. His skill as an archer had been made to look foolish by a mere animal. "Attack," he ordered his attendants. "Bring down this arrogant beast." A volley of arrows filled the air. The monkey, suddenly overwhelmed by the coordinated assault, could not deflect them all. In an instant, he was struck by multiple arrows and fell dead to the forest floor, his extraordinary abilities proving useless against such overwhelming force. The prince turned to his wise companion, Yen Pui, who had watched this scene unfold with growing understanding. "You see what happened?" the prince said. "This animal advertised his cleverness. He trusted in his own skill. He thought no one could touch him. Remember that. Do not rely on distinction and talent when you deal with men." Yen Pui absorbed this lesson deeply. When they returned to the kingdom, he reflected on how his own accomplishments and reputation might be creating the same dangerous pride that had destroyed the monkey. He quietly became the disciple of a humble sage, seeking to rid himself of everything that made him appear outstanding or special. He renounced the pleasures that had once defined his status and learned to hide every distinction that might set him apart from others. Through patient practice, Yen Pui cultivated such genuine humility that soon no one in the kingdom knew what to make of him. He had become so ordinary, so unassuming, that people began to sense something profound in his very ordinariness. Thus they held him in awe, not for what he displayed, but for the mysterious depth they sensed beneath his simple presence. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Those who know do not speak. Those who speak do not know." This tale unveils the spiritual danger of making our wisdom or abilities into a source of identity and pride. Why do we feel compelled to demonstrate our spiritual understanding or special qualities? Zen Buddhism reveals how the ego co-opts even our most genuine insights, turning them into tools for maintaining separation and superiority. The very achievements that should dissolve the sense of separate self can actually strengthen it when we become identified with being advanced or enlightened. The story points us toward understanding how spiritual pride operates. Like the monkey, we may develop genuine abilities through practice, deeper calm, clearer insight, or greater compassion. But when we begin to identify with these qualities, when we use them to distinguish ourselves from others, they become weapons that ultimately destroy us. This ancient wisdom illuminates a paradox at the heart of spiritual development. The more we genuinely progress, the more invisible that progress should become. True wisdom naturally expresses itself as humility because it reveals the interconnected nature of all existence, dissolving any basis for feeling superior to others. Zen teacher Shunryu Suzuki spoke of don't know mind as the essence of beginner's mind. This is not ignorance, but the wisdom that recognizes how little our conceptual understanding actually penetrates the mystery of existence. The monkey key's tragedy was believing. His cleverness made him special, rather than recognizing it as a temporary expression of universal intelligence. The Buddha taught, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. Yen Pui discovered that by hiding his distinctions, by becoming nothing special, he accessed a more profound kind of influence, one that touched others through presence rather than performance. Consider your own spiritual journey. Can you notice moments when insights or abilities become sources of subtle pride? When meditation experiences, psychological understanding, or compassionate actions become ways of feeling different from or better than others? Each time we make our practice into an identity. We create the spiritual equivalent of the monkey key's dangerous display. Tonight, as you rest in simple being, can you practice the art of being nobody special? Can you find the freedom that comes not from demonstrating your wisdom, but from resting in the ordinary mystery of awareness itself? As the Buddha said, those who are free of resentful thoughts surely find peace. The deepest peace comes when we release even our attachment to being peaceful. Let us continue our journey with a story about maintaining inner balance regardless of external circumstances. This is the teaching of Master Hakuin and the power of Is That So? Master Hakuin lived in a small village where he was deeply respected for his wisdom, compassion, and exemplary character. For decades, he had maintained a reputation as a pure and enlightened teacher, someone who had transcended ordinary human weaknesses and embodied the highest spiritual ideals. Villagers often brought their problems to him, seeking guidance and inspiration from his teachings and his impeccable way of life. In this same village lived a beautiful young woman whose family was well known and respected. When she became pregnant outside of marriage, her condition caused a scandal that rippled through the tight-knit community. Her parents were furious and demanded to know who was responsible for bringing such shame upon their family. At first, the young woman refused to reveal the father's identity. She was protecting someone she loved, someone whose reputation and future would be destroyed if the truth came out. But as her parents' anger intensified and the pressure became unbearable, she made a desperate decision. In a moment of panic and confusion, she pointed to the one person she thought could weather this storm better than her actual lover, the respected Master Hakuin. When her outraged parents confronted the Zen master with their daughter's accusation, they expected protests of innocence, explanations, or at least some expression of shock at being falsely accused. Instead, Hakuin listened calmly to their angry words and simply replied, "Is that so?" His response only seemed to confirm their worst suspicions. Surely an innocent man would defend himself. More vigorously, the scandal exploded throughout the village. People who had revered Hakuin as a saint now whispered that he was a hypocrite who had been living a lie. His reputation was destroyed overnight, and former students abandoned him in disgust and disappointment. When the child was born, the parents brought the baby directly to Hakuin. "This is your responsibility now," they declared bitterly. "Since you are the father, you must take care of this child." They thrust the infant into his arms and walked away, leaving him to face the consequences of a crime he had never committed. Again, Hakuin simply said, "Is that so?" and accepted the baby without protest or explanation. For many months, the former master cared for the child with tender attention. He fed the infant, changed diapers, walked the floors during sleepless nights, and provided all the love and care that any devoted parent would give. Neighbors who had once brought him offerings of food and respect now ignored him or spoke of him with contempt. He had lost his position, his reputation, and his livelihood, but he continued to care for the child with peaceful dedication. Meanwhile, the young woman struggled with the weight of her lie, watching the revered teacher suffer for her deception, while caring lovingly for a child that wasn't. His became unbearable. The guilt consumed her until she could no longer live with what she had done. Finally, she confessed the truth to her parents. The real father was a young man in the village, whom she had been trying to protect. Her parents were horrified to learn what they had done to an innocent man. They rushed to Hakuin's simple dwelling with profuse apologies. "Master, we have wronged you terribly. they said, bowing deeply. Our daughter has confessed that you are not the father. We know now that you have suffered unjustly for our mistake. Please forgive us and allow us to take the child back to its real family. Hakuan listened to their apologies with the same equanimity he had shown to their accusations. As he gently placed the baby in their arms, he offered the same response he had given throughout the entire ordeal. Is that so? As Buddha's wisdom reminds us, hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule. What emerges from this story is the profound power of maintaining inner equilibrium, regardless of how others perceive us or what circumstances life presents. Why do we allow external events and other people's opinions to determine our inner state? Zen Buddhism teaches that true freedom comes from developing an unshakable center that remains stable, whether we're being praised or blamed, honored or dishonored, treated fairly or unjustly. Hakuin's response is that so represents a profound spiritual practice. He wasn't being indifferent or passive. He was demonstrating the ultimate non-attachment to reputation, status, and even justice itself. His consistent response showed that his sense of worth and purpose came from within rather than from external validation. Consider how differently most of us would react to false accusations, public humiliation, and complete loss of reputation. The natural human response is to defend ourselves, to fight against injustice, to demand that others see the truth. But Hakuin's approach reveals another possibility, meeting all circumstances with the same peaceful acceptance. This doesn't mean we should never defend ourselves, or that we should passively accept all injustices. Hakuin's teaching is more subtle. He shows us that our inner peace doesn't have to depend on external circumstances being fair or favorable. We can maintain our center, regardless of how the world treats us. The Buddha taught, "You will not be punished for your anger. You will be punished by your anger." Hakuin's equanimity protected him from the additional suffering that would have come from resentment, self-pity, or desperate attempts to restore his reputation. While the situation was undoubtedly challenging, he didn't compound the difficulty with emotional resistance. Look deeply at your own reactions to criticism, misunderstanding, or unfair treatment. How much of your suffering comes from the actual events, and how much comes from your mental and emotional responses to those events? Hakuin's example suggests that we have far more control over the second source of suffering than the first. Tonight, as you encounter whatever judgments, misunderstandings, or unfair treatments life may bring, can you remember Master Hakuin's peaceful? Is that so? Can you find the space between what happens to you and how you respond, discovering that your inner peace need not be held hostage by external circumstances? Buddha's wisdom teaches us peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. True spiritual development isn't measured by how well life treats us, but by how gracefully we can meet whatever life brings. Maintaining our compassion, dignity, and inner tranquility, regardless of whether the world recognizes our worth or understands our true nature. Let us continue on our journey with a story about how our inner landscape shapes our outer experience. This is the tale of the two towns in a bustling marketplace where merchants hawked their wares and travelers stopped to rest on their journeys. A wise Zen master had established a modest tea stall. People came not only for refreshment, but for the master's reputation for offering practical wisdom to those facing life's transitions and uncertainties. On this particular day, two different men approached the master's stall, each carrying the same question, but embodying very different energies. Both were considering major life changes. Both were strangers to this place, and both sought guidance about whether this town might become their new home. The first man arrived with a tense expression, his shoulders carrying the weight of accumulated frustrations. As he approached the tea stall, his eyes darted around suspiciously, already assessing and finding fault with what he observed. "I'm thinking of moving to this town," he announced without preamble. "What's it like?" The Zen master looked at the man with gentle attention, noting not just his words, but the quality of energy he brought to the question. Rather than offering immediate description, the master asked his own question. "What was your old town like?" The first man's response came quickly, as if he had rehearsed these complaints many times. "It was dreadful," he said with obvious bitterness. "Everyone was hateful and unfriendly. The neighbors were inconsiderate. The shopkeepers were rude, and the whole place was full of selfish, unpleasant people. I couldn't stand it there anymore." The master nodded thoughtfully, his expression remaining compassionate despite the negativity pouring from his visitor. "This town is very much the same," he replied simply. "I don't think you should move here." The first man's face darkened with disappointment and frustration. Without another word, he turned and walked away, muttering under his breath about how this place was probably just as bad as everywhere else. Shortly after the first man departed, the second traveler approached the tea store. His manner was notably different, relaxed, curious, and open. His eyes took in the surroundings with appreciation rather than judgment, and when he smiled at the master, it seemed to come from a place of genuine warmth. "I'm thinking of moving to this town," he said chiefly. "What's it like?" The master regarded this second visitor with the same careful attention he had given. The first again choosing to learn more before offering his assessment. "What was your old town like?" he asked. The second man's face lit up as he considered the question. "It was wonderful," he said, with obvious fondness. "Everyone was so friendly and helpful. My neighbors looked out for each other. The local merchants knew everyone by name, and there was a real sense of community. I was very happy there. I'm only considering a change because I'm looking for new adventures and opportunities." The master smiled knowingly. "This town is very much the same," he told the second man. "I think you will like it here very much." The second man's face broke into a delighted grin. He thanked the master warmly and walked away with a spring in his step, already seeing possibilities and connections in his new environment. Buddha's wisdom teaches us all that we are is the result of what we have thought. The mind is everything. What we think we become. This ancient insight illuminates the profound truth demonstrated by the master's seemingly contradictory responses to the two travelers. Here we discover one of the most fundamental principles of human experience. We don't see the world as it is, but as we are. The master gave identical answers to both men because he recognized that their questions revealed far more about their internal states than about their external circumstances. Why do some people find community and kindness wherever they go, while others encounter hostility and disappointment in the same environments? Buddhist psychology explains that our perceptual filters, shaped by our habitual mental patterns, literally create our experienced reality. We notice evidence that confirms our existing beliefs while filtering out information that contradicts them. The first man carried what modern psychology might call a negative attribution bias. the tendency to interpret ambiguous situations in the most negative possible way. His mind was like a magnet for negative experiences. Not because the world was inherently hostile, but because that's what he was conditioned to see. The second man demonstrated the opposite pattern, a generous attribution style that assumed the best in others and looked for positive connections. His mind was attuned to kindness and possibility. Consider how this plays out in daily life. Two people can work in the same office and have completely different experiences. One sees politics, competition, and dysfunction everywhere. The other finds mentorship, collaboration, and growth opportunities in the same environment. This doesn't mean that objective conditions don't matter, or that all experiences are equally positive. Rather, it points to the enormous influence our mental habits have on shaping our lived reality. As Zen teacher Jon Kabat-Zinn says, "Wherever you go, there you are." We carry our internal weather with us, and it colors everything we encounter. The master's wisdom lay in recognizing that no external change of location could solve the first man's problem. If he moved to this town with the same negative perceptual filters, he would recreate the same disappointing experiences he was trying to escape. This insight has profound implications for how we approach life changes and problem solving. Often when we're unhappy with our circumstances, our first instinct is to change the external conditions. But if we don't address the internal patterns that created our dissatisfaction, we simply recreate similar problems in new settings. But this principle works in both directions. When we cultivate mental habits of appreciation, curiosity, and goodwill, we begin to notice more evidence supporting those perspectives. The world doesn't magically change, but our capacity to see its positive qualities expands dramatically. Tonight, as you reflect on your own experiences of community, work, and relationships, can you notice the interpretive lens through which you typically view these interactions? Are you more like the first traveler, scanning for problems and disappointments, or the second, looking for connection and possibility? As the Buddha taught, the mind is everything. What you think, you become. The most powerful tool for transforming our external experience lies not in changing our circumstances, but in changing the quality of awareness we bring to whatever circumstance we encounter. And let us now turn to a story about the difference between seeing and being seen, between wisdom and the appearance of wisdom. This is the tale of the blind man and his lantern. Late one evening, as darkness settled over the village like a soft blanket, a blind man prepared to walk home after spending the day with a dear friend. They had shared tea, conversation, and the comfortable silence that comes between people who truly know each other. But now the hour was late, and the blind man needed to make his way through the winding streets to his own home. As he prepared to leave, feeling around for his walking stick and adjusting his cloak against the night air, his friend looked out at the pitch-black streets with concern. "Please," the friend said kindly, "let me give you my lantern to carry with you. The streets are particularly dark tonight, and there are many obstacles along the way." The blind man paused, surprised by the offer. "Why would I need a lantern?" he asked with gentle amusement. "You know I cannot see, the light won't help me find my way any better than darkness would. My feet know these streets, and my other senses guide me just fine." "Ah," his friend replied thoughtfully, "but perhaps the lantern isn't for you to see better. Perhaps it's so that others will see you better and won't accidentally bump into you as they hurry through the dark streets. This reasoning made perfect sense to the blind man. While he had learned to navigate the world without sight, he understood that others depended on their eyes and might not notice him in the darkness. "Of course," he said, accepting the lantern gratefully. "How thoughtful of you." The lantern was a simple but beautiful thing, made of rice paper stretched over delicate bamboo strips, with a candle secured safely inside. His friend lit the candle, and the warm glow illuminated a circle of ground-blind man's feet. Even though he couldn't see the light himself, he could feel its warmth and knew that others would see him coming from a good distance away. Off he went into the night, the lantern swinging gently at his side as he made his way along the familiar path toward home. He felt confident and considerate, knowing that he was taking care both of his own safety and the safety of others who might be traveling these same dark streets. But he had walked only a few yards when suddenly, crack, another traveler walked straight into him. The collision was jarring, sending both men stumbling. The blind man's lantern swayed wildly, and he nearly lost his balance. "Why don't you watch where you're going?" the blind man called out indignantly, steadying himself and adjusting his robes. "Can't you see this lantern? I'm carrying it specifically so people like you won't bump into me." The other traveler, equally surprised by the collision, looked at the blind man's lantern and couldn't help but laugh. "My friend," he said gently, "why don't you light the candle? Your lantern is completely dark." The blind man reached toward his lantern and felt around the bamboo frame. Sure enough, the candle had gone out shortly after he left his friend's house, though he had been completely unaware of it. He had been walking through the darkness, carrying what he believed was a source of light, but was actually just an empty container, no more illuminating than if he had carried nothing at all. The Buddha once said, "Thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared." This tale unveils the profound difference between carrying the container of wisdom and carrying wisdom itself. Why do we so often mistake the form of understanding for understanding itself? Zen Buddhism reveals that we frequently become attached to the external symbols of insight, the books we've read, the retreats we've attended, the spiritual concepts we can discuss, while the actual flame of awareness remains unlit within us. The blind man's situation is deeply familiar to anyone who has walked a spiritual path. We acquire the lantern of teachings, surround ourselves with the framework of practice, and assume that possessing these things means we are illuminated. But unless the candle of direct experience is actually burning, we're still walking in darkness while believing we carry light. Consider your own spiritual or philosophical understanding. How much of what you believe you know is actually lived wisdom, and how much is merely conceptual knowledge you're carrying around like an unlit lantern? The difference becomes apparent only when we encounter the inevitable collisions of real life, moments when our understanding is tested by actual circumstances. In Zen practice, we distinguish between knowing about and knowing directly. You can study everything ever written about the taste of an apple, but until you actually bite into one, your knowledge remains second-hand. Similarly, we can accumulate vast knowledge about peace, compassion, or wisdom without ever actually embodying these qualities. The blind man was sincere in his intentions. He genuinely wanted to help others see him and avoid accidents. But his good intentions couldn't substitute for the actual function of a lit candle. This is the challenge of all spiritual practice, not just wanting to be wise or appearing to be wise, but actually cultivating the direct experience that makes wisdom real. Zen Master Dogen taught to study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. The lantern represents our self-concept as someone who is wise, spiritual, or enlightened. As long as we're primarily concerned with maintaining this identity, the actual candle of genuine insight remains unlit. The traveler who bumped into the blind man wasn't being cruel when he pointed out the obvious. Sometimes we need others to help us see that our candle has gone out, that we've been coasting on old understanding, without tending to the flame of present moment awareness. Look deeply at your own experience. When do you find yourself carrying an unlit lantern? Perhaps it's when you offer advice you haven't fully integrated yourself. When you speak about peace while feeling agitated inside, or when you present yourself as having figured out something you're still actively struggling with. These aren't moral failures. They're simply signs that it's time to relight the candle. The beauty of this teaching is that discovering our lantern is dark isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning, the moment we realize we've been walking in darkness. While believing we carried light, we can stop, find a source of flame, and actually illuminate our path. The lantern itself isn't useless. It just needs the essential element that makes it functional. In our relationships, careers, and spiritual practices, we encounter this same dynamic repeatedly. We develop the outer forms of expertise, the vocabulary, the credentials, the appearances of mastery, but sometimes lose touch with the living essence that originally inspired us. The marriage counselor whose own relationship is struggling, the teacher who has stopped learning, the spiritual practitioner who has become rigid in their practice. All are carrying unlit lanterns. The Buddha taught, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. One moment of genuine presence, authentic compassion, or real understanding illuminates more than years of accumulated concepts. The lit candle, however small, provides actual guidance in a way that the most beautiful empty lantern cannot. Zen practice continually asks us to check whether our candle is actually burning. Are we speaking from direct experience or from memory? Are we acting from present awareness or from habit? Are we offering genuine warmth and illumination, or just the appearance of these qualities? This isn't about achieving perfection or never having our candle go out. Candles extinguish naturally. That's their nature. Wind blows them out, they burn down, they flicker and fade. The practice is in noticing when the light has gone out and having the humility to relight it rather than pretending it's still burning. Tonight, as you consider the various roles you play and the wisdom you believe you possess, can you honestly assess which lanterns in your life are actually lit? Where are you carrying genuine understanding? And where might you be relying on the mere appearance of insight? Can you find the courage to acknowledge the dark lanterns without shame, seeing them simply as opportunities to rekindle authentic understanding? As Buddha's wisdom reminds us, 3 things cannot be long hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. Eventually, the darkness of an unlit lantern reveals itself through collision with reality. But rather than waiting for these inevitable bumps, we can choose to tend our inner flame with the same care we would give to any precious light, knowing that when it burns brightly, It illuminates not only our own path, but helps others find their way as well. Tonight, as we draw our shared exploration to a peaceful end, can you notice how the tranquility you've discovered isn't something you needed to acquire, but rather something you simply remembered was already yours? Can you feel that the deep calm you've touched tonight exists, not only within these teachings, but in your own natural awareness, patiently waiting to be acknowledged? The Buddha reminded us, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. Contemplating this wisdom, recognize that serenity and understanding don't rely on perfect conditions or extraordinary experiences, but flourish from your own inner landscape, available in each breath you take. Throughout tonight's exploration, every teaching has woven together a common thread, revealing the liberating truth that struggle dissolves when we stop fighting. What is that? Genuine freedom flows naturally when we cease clinging to outcomes, and that lasting contentment emerges from witnessing life clearly beyond our habitual patterns and knee-jerk responses. Even when your thoughts wander, even when tension creeps back in, the insights you've gathered tonight have taken root in the rich ground of your being, ready to nourish you whenever you need their guidance. Remember, as you settle into rest, that these timeless wisdoms have revealed not some far-off destination, but a way of inhabiting this very moment with complete presence and acceptance in the stillness that surrounds you. Now, notice how profoundly your perspective has expanded, how effortlessly your breathing has deepened, and how tenderly your mind rests, unburdened and receptive. These teachings serve as gentle reminders that authentic understanding isn't concealed in remote monasteries or buried within ancient manuscripts. It radiates clearly and unmistakably through the beautiful ordinariness of conscious attention. Tonight you've tasted that reality, a reality that emerges when we simply stop, breathe, and truly see. As you transition from this sanctuary of peace back into the rhythm of everyday life, take with you not merely the words themselves, but the profound stillness and clarity they have awakened within your own experience. May this tranquility remain your constant companion, lighting your path through both joyful and difficult times ahead. The peace you found tonight was never truly lost. It was simply waiting for you to come home to yourself. Thank you for joining us on this journey at Sleep Well.